We focus in on Sephiroth and we look at him as a figure we can compare to Achilles.
Cloud is properly introduced to Aerith when he falls through the church and lands in the flower bed.
Yep.
And Aerith says goodbye to him by pushing him back through the flower
bed. The flower bed. Beautiful stuff. Good catch. Wait a second. Okay, the golden light represents this visually. Oh, Sephiroth's coming through the door visually. That's Aerith's true self. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today, I am joined by legendary MJ Gallagher, who you may have seen his work. He teaches mythology through Final Fantasy, both Norse, Greek, and all other kinds of stuff. It's really, really amazing. I've learned a ton myself. I love mythology. MJ, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm MJ Gallagher, exactly as Phil said. I'm an author who my passion lies in mythology and Final Fantasy. I'm also a significantly less beautiful man than my host.
No, not at all.
I'm from Glasgow in Scotland, which is why I also sound like an angry version of Kate Sith. I've been very passionate about Final Fantasy VII since the original game launched. My own writing experience, I worked professionally in the tourism industry about 12, 13 years ago, which really opened my eyes to sort of different cultures, different sort of histories around the world. And I already had a sort of basic interest in mythology. So combining all those things, I started to realise that much of what I was learning about in sort of global cultures, I already recognised within Final Fantasy VII and the broader series, and decided just to sort of start digging, start learning a bit more. The more I learned, the more I loved the idea that mythology had been deliberately implemented across the Final Fantasy series, and I just wanted to share that stuff with the wider community. So I first wrote Norse myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII, which was pretty successful, and followed with Greek myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII. I actually have a copy with me.
Yeah, look at that.
There we are, just a little dirty plug right there.
Please.
So at the moment, I've been looking at more detailed analysis of Final Fantasy VII. Obviously, we have Rebirth, we have Ever Crisis. I had been working on a Trojan War book for Final Fantasy VII, which I'm really excited about. But more recently, I've also announced that I've started work on a Final Fantasy 16 book, which is called Mythos, Final Fantasy 16, and I'll be announcing more details about that soon. But yeah, I'm all about mythology, I'm all about Final Fantasy, and I'm all about how those two are combined.
Lovely. Yeah, listen, we're going to have a great talk today.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to kind of say that I'm a huge fan of your work, Phil. I'm privileged to be here today, so thank you so much for the invite. I do appreciate it.
It's absolutely my pleasure. I love your work as well. Like I said, I've read your books. We've talked about your books on the stream in the past, and I don't think we've never had a chance to sit down alone and talk. So this is going to be really great. Yeah, this is going to be really great.
We've been interacting for years, literally years now. But this is the first time we had a one-to-one conversation.
Yeah, exactly. This is the first time we can really sit and just dig into it. So it's going to be fantastic. And we've had a couple ideas we want to address, but I think we're going to start with just the kind of broad idea of symbolism in Final Fantasy VII. And then from there, we're going to tackle some topics, including Sephiroth, lots of Sephiroth stuff. As you guys know, I've been going down the rabbit hole Sephiroth theories and ideas for a couple of years now, some of which seem to be coming true. We'll see. They seem to be on path to coming true. And then we're going to talk about just Final Fantasy in general. We're going to talk about mythology, how it relates to Final Fantasy, as MJ already mentioned. He's an expert on that. And then we're going to possibly use our understanding of mythology to maybe predict and think about where FF7 is going and maybe even the future of the series. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And as always, chat, if you have any contributions, feel free to get in there. And at the end, I'm sure we'll have a question section where you guys can ask stuff. But why don't we open it up and start with that, MJ? Symbolism in Final Fantasy VII. I'll just put on the table, I'll lay on the table. My most recent discovery was, of course, this symbolism of the wing, the origins of the wing for Sephiroth, what that might mean. There's a cloud that is symbolizing Sephiroth's wing behind him in the new Ever Crisis footage, and man, that's if that's not a treasure trove, just that sentence, it's not a symbolism treasure trove. So why don't we go into it? I've talked about how Sephiroth is, possibly wanting to be a hero, and to this childish idea of saving everyone, how that might be what his reunion actually is. So, MJ, why don't you tell us what some of your thoughts are?
Sure, yeah. So I I spent a lot of time after Final Fantasy 16 thinking about the cycle of death and rebirth. One of the main themes that occurs within Final Fantasy 16 is, you know, the cycle of life. Birth, life, death, rebirth. Is something that we kind of see across different religions or different mythologies. The Phoenix is very much the most famous icon, I guess, of that. The story of the Phoenix, or particularly the later mythology of the Phoenix, about how it lives and it combusts at the end of its life, and then the same bird emerges from the ashes of its predecessor. But there are many things that symbolize rebirth within Final Fantasy 16, so that's kind of been on my mind a lot over the last year. Of course, when it got to Final Fantasy 7 already, I was kind of really quite excited to see what type of symbolism for rebirth and the cycle of rebirth that we might find in there, and I was absolutely blown away by just some of the content that exists from like a Norse mythology perspective, a Greek mythology perspective, from Judeo-Christian perspective as well. Even Egyptian mythology is referenced at times. It's so wonderful to see. So I spoke about this in one of my most recent breakdown videos that I did for Rebirth in Chapter 2. And when it comes to Greek mythology, this idea of birth, life, death, rebirth is probably best symbolized not within the Phoenix, which is a kind of mix between classical mythology, but it's based on Egyptian or pre-existing Egyptian mythology. But the best example is probably to do with the story of Demeter and Persephone. So when you talk about death and rebirth in classical mythology, it is very closely tied with the cycle of the seasons. So the idea is that vegetation springs up. The birth of vegetation each year is spring, and then it comes to fruition in summer, begins to wither again in autumn, and then it kind of dies in winter, just for it to re-emerge again. Springtime. So the way that the ancient Greeks explained this was through the myth of Demeter and Persephone. Demeter was the goddess of the harvest, and the idea here is that her daughter Persephone was out picking flowers one day. The god of the underworld, Hades, emerged from under the ground. He kidnapped her and took her back into the underworld, where she remained. And Demeter was deeply upset and searched for Persephone. She actually searched for her so long that she kind of abandoned her duties as a goddess of the seasons. So all the harvest started to wither and die and so on. So it kind of came to Zeus's attention that this is what was going on. And eventually an arrangement was put in place where Persephone would return to the gods, or the upper world, for 6 months of the season, or 6 months of the year, and then return to Hades for the other 6 months. So the idea here is that when Persephone, who is the goddess of spring, she's the goddess of fertility, She emerges from the underworld, which is, when the flowers start to bloom and the harvests are the crops are planted. And then when she returns to the underworld again, we get sort of fall into winter, and that's when all the vegetation dies. That's when the sort of ground withers, and everything becomes lifeless effectively. Only for Persephone again to re-emerge, and the cycle continues from there on.
Mm.
So, in when we take this concept and look at it, we actually see it really early. In Rebirth, we see it in Chapter 2 in Calm. And Chloe was actually one of the names of Demeter. It was
Awesome.
kind of a name for her in her youth. But more specifically, when you get the mission from Chloe, Chloe talks about wanting to kind of go pick flowers way off in this sort of plateau. So Aerith agrees that that's what she's going to do. So Cloud and Aerith and the rest of them actually go to a flower meadow to pick flowers, which is specifically what Persephone was doing when she was first kidnapped by Hades. So this idea of Demeter and the harvest and Persephone and the flowers and the cycle of nature, this is obviously at the start of the game, the start of the story, and then eventually, how the plot ends. Persephone herself is known specifically for two things. She was the queen of the underworld, the afterlife, as it were. And she was very much, associated with flowers, associated with the coming of spring, just the same way that Aerith is. Aerith, of course, is the last Cetra. She is the one who has the power within the life stream. She is, by a country mile, the one most closely associated with flowers.
Oh yeah.
All throughout the game. There's a couple of things towards the end of the game in Chapter 14 as well. Like, for example, when at the start of Chapter 14, where Cloud and Aerith, are in the dream or the other world, or whatever you want to call it, and she asks for Cloud to get a gift, and the gift that Cloud chooses, of course, no matter what you pick,
Yeah. Yeah.
But the vendor gives them the yellow flowers pin. So Aerith then puts that on her jacket in exactly the same place that she placed the yellow flower on Cloud's top at the start of Remake.
Yeah. Yeah.
When she talks about that at the time, at the start of Remake, she's talking about this flower symbolizes, in the English version she says the reunion of lovers, but a more close translation to the Japanese is loved ones. So it's not specifically a romantic thing, although it could mean a romantic thing.
Yeah.
So we start to see this cycle of, at the start of Remake, she presents Cloud with the flower that she obviously puts in the jumper, and at the end of Rebirth, Cloud presents Aerith with the imagery of the same flower.
Yeah, reunion.
Say, same thing when in Remake, Cloud is properly introduced to Aerith when he falls through the church and lands in the flower bed.
Yep.
And Aerith says goodbye to him by pushing him back through the flower bed.
Yeah, the flower bed. Beautiful stuff. Good catch. Yeah.
We're starting to see these loops, these cycles, which again, the word cycle is almost synonymous with Rebirth, because Rebirth implies the cycle of birth, life, death, rebirth. So that's just a very early example of what goes on. And
I love it. Yeah, and a game called Rebirth too, right? To kind of
so.
Yeah, to key in on the cyclical nature of all these events is just so great. And this is exactly what I was talking about, and I've said it a million times now. My first reaction to the ending is like, I don't know that I've actually ever seen a video game, for sure, a video game that is it it asks so much of the audience in a good way, not in a bad way, for us to pay attention. And every single shot is like so well considered and storyboarded and everything. And we're talking about hours upon hours of cutscenes. It's not like, oh, there's a 5 minute thing and it's, they put some work into it. No, it's like this monumental undertaking. And the fact that if you guys watch my cinematic breakdown, my shot for shot breakdown of the ending, even the fact that I can speculate and find meaning in all the things is really significant, guys. It's not just random shots thrown together. And for MJ to point that out, yeah, of course they meet on the flowers, and in my opinion and many others, that is the final goodbye of Aerith and Cloud, where she pushes him back through the flowers. And it's just like, oh, it's already such a powerful scene, and to then add that other layer on top of it. And the other layers that are already there of like, wait a second, okay, the golden light represents this visually. Oh, Sephiroth's coming through the door visually. That's Aerith's true self that he is now, going to discover. And it is just so packed to the brim, and it's something that you can go back and glean these details from for years to come. And that's why I think it's so special. It's like a great film. You can watch films that have just everything's been so painstakingly considered, and there's nothing like it. It's really something special. And the original was already so good. So now we have like all these layers of even just like visual language that wasn't available back in the day with technology, and just the language of film as opposed to just kind of like static images. And it's a beautiful thing. So yeah, what a great way to start, MJ.
So and I as we were kind of speaking about off screen, I have so much respect. I have so much love for the way that you are able to break this down, because visual or looking at symbols is something that I'm slightly stronger at, but the visuals themselves, the color. I love coming to your channels that people like myself can understand and can appreciate.
Thank you.
And it's a wonderful gift to have, and it's you sharing that with us is a wonderful gift to the community, and I'm so grateful to you for that, because it opens my eyes to so many parts of how these games are designed that I wouldn't get to see otherwise.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You do the same. You do the same, like I said, with mythology for people. It's a not approachable subject for a lot of people. Mythology, as we just said, even Greek mythology, it's not like there is like a Bible that you can go read. It's all in one place. It is all over the place in many different sources, many different locations and eras and everything. So it's really awesome that you do it and make it so digestible. Really, boom. One book is really great. And listen, with the film, my mission has always been to just get people to appreciate the art more. And why have I always loved Final Fantasy and now gravitate towards it with my content is because there's just nothing out there that is this rich and cares so much about every detail and everything. So it makes my job easy. But at the same time, like I said, I wouldn't be able to analyze anything. There's some videos where I'm like, I won't say the games, but there's been some games where I'm like, maybe I'll cover this on my channel. And I watch it. I'm like, there is nothing to say. Next, there's literally nothing to talk about. It's like, it looks cool. There's not much to say. So, Final Fantasy has just always been that for me. So, but I love the symbolism talk. We talked about the wing, like I said, on with Sephiroth on my channel, and I've had a lot of thoughts on Sephiroth. You mentioned you're writing a possible Trojan War Iliad tie-in with Final Fantasy VII. I can't wait to hear about this, because you guys know I'll just give a brief refresh for people who haven't heard this. One of my thoughts with Sephiroth and my theories was that, man, I think it'd be so cool if we focus in on Sephiroth and we look at him as a figure we can compare to Achilles. If you don't know Achilles, he's one of the most famous Greek heroes during the Trojan cycle. He faced off against Hector in one of the most famous duels, which has been depicted a million times now through plays and movies and everything else and video games. And it's a really special thing. And I thought it'd be really cool if we look at Sephiroth. How does he get his Masamune? What if he got, which is actually an Eastern Japanese weapon, which is actually the only place in the Final Fantasy VII world is Wutai that has those weapons. Could be pretty cool if he got it from a sort of Hector figure. Somebody in Wutai who is, the Hector to his Achilles. And also with Hector and Achilles, we have this interesting camaraderie because they're the two strongest. Achilles lives a lonely existence, even more lonely as he accepts his fate. And some really cool things happen in the Iliad, which I'm sure MJ knows about. My favorite of which is Achilles, when he faces Hector. Hector has actually taken Achilles' armor from Patroclus, who is Achilles' friend and lover, takes his armor and wears it. So when Achilles goes to face Hector, it's pretty much a choice has been laid out to him where it's like he can go and kill Hector and he will pretty much die but be this famous, hero and but his life will end. Or he could not face Hector, he can not seek revenge, and he can just live, maybe go start a family or something. But he goes and fights Hector. And think about the symbolism of it. He's actually fighting Hector, who's wearing his old armor, and he's wearing new armor that was made by Hephaestus at this point. But he's fighting the image of himself. And he literally kills himself. He kills Hector and then seals his doom. It's just like, talk about symbolism, right? I think it's one of the most beautiful sort of visual things that can go completely invisible when you read the book. It's just there. You have to kind of glean it for yourself. But I think it's very meaningful. So I would love it if Sephiroth has this character that he can interact with, and maybe he kills them, he destroys them, takes the Masamune, and realizes, just like with Genesis, just like with Angelic, he's completely alone. He's destroyed one of the only people that could have been his peer, his equal, that he could have understood, someone who's really strong. So, and it could lead to his going down this path of loneliness and kind of another thread of humanity taken away from him until in Nibelheim he's just completely alone. So what do you think, MJ? Let's talk about the Iliad. Let's talk about Sephiroth. What do you think?
Wow. Yeah. So I don't think it is anywhere near a coincidence that Sephiroth and Achilles parallel one another so well.
Yeah.
For those who followed my work, I talk about this all the time. But if you're not familiar with the mythology side of things or what I do, the lead scenario writer for Phoenix and the scenario writer for the majority of the compilation is a man named Kazushige Najima. Now, Kazushige Najima, before joining Square in 1994, he actually worked on a series of video games that he wrote and directed, and known as The Glory of Heracles. So Najima's professional background before joining Square was actually making video games about Greek mythology. So when he was given the task of being the lead scenario writer for Final Fantasy VII, what he did was take a lot of what he was comfortable with, what he knew in Greek mythology, and implemented it, in various parts of the story, various characters, in ways that you might not realise. So Sephiroth, of course, he's introduced in Final Fantasy VII as this legendary war hero, and later on we learn that, he is a first-class soldier, like the first-class soldier. And if you were to pick one character in Greek mythology that you would be able to call the legendary war hero, it's Achilles. If you were to pick someone that you would be able to call the super soldier, it's Achilles.
Yeah, I mean, the closest you could get is Heracles, but he's not really a soldier. Like, he does conquer some cities, but it's just like he gets angry and like takes down a couple cities and then like goes back to wandering around with a club. Yeah, that's it.
So Heracles lived, a really kind of complex life, and you're right that he did participate in battles, but he never went to any prolonged wars as such. And Heracles was known for his strength, whereas Achilles is known for his speed.
Yeah.
Which is something that is much closer to Sephiroth and how Sephiroth is sort of described.
Yeah, totally.
But the beautiful thing about the connections between Sephiroth and Achilles, it's not just the story beats. When we look at the Iliad in particular, and how that combines with the Nibelheim incident in the original Final Fantasy VII. Even if you look at their origins, like Achilles' mother is a goddess, or a kind of minor goddess known as an Oceanid, who is a shapeshifter. She's known for her shape-shifting abilities.
How
So
appropriate. Yeah.
already we have this connection between the mother, put in
Yeah.
quotation marks. But the story, and this isn't actually part of the Iliad. This is something that was introduced in later classical mythology through an author called Statius, where the famous story about Achilles' heel.
So Thetis takes him and dips him in the river Styx, but unfortunately, he's holding his ankle. So his ankle is the only part that's not dipped in the river Styx, essentially, which would mean his weakness. But yeah, as MJ was saying, this is actually not in the Iliad. Achilles does not die in the Iliad. It ends, during essentially the funeral games for Hector, and there are various different sources that talk about Achilles and his weakness or his invulnerability and kind of. But that's where that comes from, the Achilles heel idea.
So the idea here is that Sephiroth is obviously considered, he's the greatest soldier. He can barely be defeated
Yeah.
in battle. Um, so when he is defeated, it's by when Achilles is defeated, he's charging forward. He's shot in the ankle by Paris, whereas Sephiroth, his whole idea is that he's so obsessed with this idea. He is presented as someone who lived a very isolated, lonely life. He didn't know who his parents were. He specifically didn't know who his mother was. And then when he gets this opportunity to meet his mother, Sephiroth shows his Achilles heel as such. This need to be loved, this need to be kind of embraced by his mother is what allows Clint to sneak up on.
Yeah, totally.
So you could actually say that how or Sephiroth's need for motherly love is what his Achilles heel was. Achilles being disrespected by Agamemnon, and
Yeah.
he decides that he's going to leave. He's going to abandon the Greek army, and it's only when Patroclus, takes up his armor and pretends to be Achilles and is killed by Hector, that Achilles re-enters the war because he just goes on a rampage because of the
Yeah.
death of Patroclus. He's so angry. He kills Hector. He then dishonors himself because rather than allowing the Trojans to take Hector's body and go
Oh
through
yeah.
the proper funerary rites, he actually drags Hector's body back and leaves it for the dogs in the Greek army camp. He then burns Patroclus's body in this huge funeral pyre and throws some of the Trojan hostages on just to kind of kill them, just to kind of set his own
Yeah.
anger.
Yeah. He's completely insane. And at this point, it's important to know that when he fights Hector, he's so enraged that he's refused to eat. I think for like several days at this point, and he's just like is so angry that he's like ceasing to be human almost. Like he doesn't have to eat, he
Yeah,
doesn't have to sleep, he doesn't sleep. That I think it's actually Zeus or the gods like put ambrosia like in his stomach so he can like keep
yeah,
existing because he's just so enraged. He actually tries fighting the river as he goes to
yeah.
fight
That's right.
Hector. He's so enraged that the gods just take him out. They're like, "What are you doing? You're fighting like primordial forces and stuff." But it's
Yeah.
absolute insanity. And yeah, he's just so far gone. And I can already think of some parallels as you're saying that. Yeah.
Well, when you take that part of the story as I've just described and you apply it to the Nibelheim flashback,
Mm.
what you get is Sephiroth is he goes to the Mount Nibel reactor. He kind of has this mental breakdown because
Mm-hmm.
he starts to think, he himself might actually have been created this monster. So he then withdraws and disappears into the Shinra Manor. So we can take that and parallel that with Achilles abandoning the Greek army.
Yeah, totally.
When Sephiroth learns that he was actually the product of the Genova project, he becomes enraged. He's just unstoppable. So you can then take that moment where he becomes withdrawn to enraged, and parallel that with the death of Patroclus. That he doesn't want glory; he just wants to live a normal life.
Totally. Yeah.
So you get to see all these sort of parallels between Sephiroth and Achilles that way. So it's like I said, it's not an accident. And even more, just to sort of round it all off, is that when Najima was writing Crisis Core, so Crisis Core released in Japan in 2007, which means that he would have been writing it from a couple of years prior to that. Simultaneous to that, I think there was maybe about 6 months between them. Another Glory of Heracles game was released that Najima wrote.
Really?
And
awesome.
Achilles is not quite a primary character in it, but he plays a substantial role in the Trojan War features in that game. So at the time of writing Crisis Core, Najima was explicitly writing about the Trojan War and Achilles. So there's the likelihood of there not being a crossover there is really quite slim.
That's so cool. I didn't know that. It was so tied in. Well, you just made me think of a whole other thing. So I mean, just sort of the slow betrayal that Sephiroth feels with Shinra, and kind of the slow like dilapidation of his faith in everything and in humanity in general, mostly with Shinra, but really just all humans and humanity. It's reminded me of Achilles. Like again, Achilles slowly like is just losing his faith in the Greek army, especially Agamemnon. And it made me think of Iphigenia, right? There's the play by Euripides, which is Iphigenia at Aulis, and it covers Clytemnestra is Iphigenia's father, this is Agamemnon's daughter, and he essentially has to sacrifice his daughter to get the winds to move again, because they've offended, it's actually Artemis that they've offended.
Yeah, Artemis,
and the winds won't stop on this island and everything. So they actually stole the storyline for Game of Thrones, if you've ever seen that. It was just completely ripped up and put in Game of Thrones with whatever the character's name was.
That doesn't sound like George Martin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly, right. So, but anyway, it's a great story, but what happens is Agamemnon lies to Iphigenia's mother and says, oh, she's actually going to marry Achilles in the play. Bring Achilles in, it's going to be great and everything. There's this whole drama that takes place, but at the end, he just murders his daughter and sacrifices her. And then the winds move again, because it's like, oh, do you want to go fight in the Trojan War or be stuck here forever? So he does kill his daughter and move on. But again, from Achilles' standpoint, think about the just betrayal and disgust that he would have for Agamemnon even before the war takes place. So then, many years later, at the 9th year of the war, he's very displeased when Agamemnon takes his war prizes, including Briseis, who is one of the maidens, the priestesses that was supposed to be Achilles' captor. So yeah, and Chryseis, I think her father as well, and some other stuff. So anyway, it's reminding me of Sephiroth and how he just slowly, betrayed over and over again, realizes what Hojo has done, the sort of disgusting things that have happened, these just monstrosities that have taken place. He feels betrayed by Genesis. He loses Angeal. Just like every little thing that could have kept him hanging on is just taken away until it's like, I'm here with Zach in Nibelheim. There's not much to hold on to. Yeah. Hello, Leah. So yeah, it's crazy. Something that we could play with Sephiroth, in the Wu-Tai War, because we still haven't really seen the Wu-Tai War, which I'm very excited about, because we've got Ever Crisis, but then I keep fearing that they're just gonna not show it, and I'm like, I think they're finally gonna do it. We have young Angeal. We have Sephiroth. They said they're finally going to show how he gets the Masamune. I was like, yes, they've been listening. Nomura said that. So they have to show it, man. And what I think we need for Sephiroth is strong rivals. We need really powerful. We need that sort of awesome, pantheon, for lack of a better word, of warriors in the Trojan War on both sides. Like I said, we have Sarpedon, we have Diomedes, we have Hector, we have just all these monstrous heroes. Phoenix even is like an older character. We have so many characters on both sides that are like
even Agamemnon and
and they're awesome in the book. They're not just like you'll see in movie adaptations that they're kind of just like these old grouchy guys who don't do anything. Like they're all out there and they're fighting, and of course there's Ajax the Lesser, Ajax the Greater, and then think about the aftermath of with Ajax. And is it Achilles' armor or is it his sword that Ajax actually kills himself?
It's he kills himself on his sword. So the reason that he kills himself is actually because and Odysseus is voted and Ajax
Of
storms
course.
out because he thinks he's the most worthy.
Hmm.
And then depending on the version of the story, so sometimes he kills himself because he feels so dishonored,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's he's kind of has this sort of mad spell that he's driven mad by
Right.
Athena, and then feels that he has dishonored himself, and throws himself onto the sword.
Right.
Which one of the things that I'm kind of talking about in my Trojan War book is there are a number of parallels between Ajax and Adil, and there are even parallels between Odysseus and Genesis.
Wait, say
Um,
that one more time. Ajax and who, and Odysseus and who?
and Jill,
Oh, and Jill.
Ajax and Jill, and Odysseus and Genesis.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
Um,
Oh, listen,
you,
listen. Achilles hates Odysseus. He despises Odysseus. Like, he despises cowards. This is one of the inspirations for my slogan: "Cowards die first." I think there's literally a point in the Iliad where Achilles is crying because he's so angry that archers like exist, and it's the idea that they can sit up there and shoot people and be safe and everything. It's disgusting, which is ironic, right? He gets killed by an archer, but it's
yeah,
just in the most dishonorable way. But it's like, yeah, I mean, Odysseus is the trickster, man. He is a sly son of a gun. Like, if anyone's like fans of Death Note, the anime, you're gonna love Odysseus. What he does in the Trojan War, he does some crazy stuff. He literally
yeah.
tricks people, and obviously the Trojan horse is his most famous trickery. I mean, he's a son of a gun. So I love.
He's a naughty boy.
Yeah, he's
Basically.
he's a naughty boy. Exactly. He is not like a traditional hero, as you'd say. But I mean that he's very much punished for this in the Odyssey. But yeah, it's cool stuff, and I would love to see Genesis and Angeal really fleshed out. Because again, when we look at Crisis Core, it's Zack's story, right? So like
Yeah.
Sephiroth is there and stuff, but everybody who kind of views it as like Sephiroth's young story, he's in it a little bit. I would love to see Angeal and Genesis and Sephiroth have like a really meaningful like how did they become friends? Why are they friends? And I think the war is the perfect way to do it, right?
Absolutely agree.
Yeah. So it's just there's so much they could do, and I think, I mean, what about you, MJ? How would you like to see sort of the Masamune explored? We've already talked about this awesome idea of kind of like the relics of heroes being argued over. The same thing happens with one of my favorite characters is Sarpedon. When he dies against Patroclus, and there's just a
Yeah.
full war over his armor to see who gets it and everything, and constantly the army is pushing back and forth to get the armor as a war prize versus protecting him. And then Sarpedon gives like the
Yeah.
most epic speech in the Iliad, in my opinion, before they go, and he talks about what does it mean to fight and die, and we're gonna either give our glory to another warrior or take theirs for ourselves. And it's a beautiful speech. But what about you, MJ? What do you think about the Masamune?
Um, I absolutely love your idea of there being an equivalent to Sephiroth in the Wutai War. The
Yeah.
Hector to the Achilles. I think that is the perfect way to do it. I couldn't agree with you more that once that individual, once the individual that was Sephiroth's equal is defeated, that's when the loneliness comes
Yeah.
in. That's when he effectively has no more challenge. So the motivation goes. Everything starts to unravel after that, which then plays into following on from that your other ideas about why he focuses so heavily on Cloud, because Cloud becomes the challenge. Cloud becomes the interesting figure that
Yeah.
then motivates him in, because Cloud is the one that killed him.
Yeah. Totally.
So I think that is the perfect way to tell that particular story. I mean, other than that, I personally, I I don't have a better version.
They could do it in other ways too. They could have it that it's forged like for Sephiroth or something in some really cool way. But like, I just can't think of another way that's more meaningful for the reasons we listed. And then also like
So
he needs a challenge. He like even when he's a kid, he just one shots everything. Right? He needs some
yeah,
figure that like pushes him.
exactly. So if if Najima wants to hold on to the sort of the Achilles parallel, then we're talking about a weapon that's forged by the gods, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So who then represents the gods? Who represents Hephaestus? Or they could, mix and match a little bit because, uh, for those of us that have listened to Max Dude, he's been talking for years about really implementing or using the Knights of the Round as a story
Yeah.
tool
You gotta.
within Part 3. It could be that the origins of the Masamune tie in
Mm.
with the King Arthur legend. So you've got maybe a parallel between the Masamune and Excalibur. But I actually, one of the things when in Rebirth, when we saw Gilgamesh
Mm.
show up, is that in Final Fantasy VIII, Gilgamesh has the Masamune
Yeah, he's
as
got
one of his.
yeah, a lot of stuff. He's always
Yeah,
collecting. Yeah.
so I thought maybe that would be a way, like just a sort of wacky idea that obviously they showed the sort of the fake Buster Sword
Yep.
on Gilgamesh's back and the fake nail bat. Another thing that they could have done, later in the story when Sephiroth summons Gilgamesh is maybe have him have the Murasame or the
Yeah.
one of the inauthentic Masamunes. So, but obviously they haven't done that. So I would be extremely surprised now if they don't, or if they go with Gilgamesh is connected to the Masamune story. But there are a few different ideas that you could throw around. I wouldn't be too upset if they tied it to the Knights of the Round stuff. But
Yeah.
again, I think your idea is the best one I've ever
I
heard.
listen. I think you could do both too, right? Like, why not have it that? Well, my mind went right to this when you said it. It's like, why not have it that the Masamune is one of the knights, like maybe the strongest knight's like sword,
Yeah,
and that is like a sword that was created with some long lost like ancients magic, some understanding of some knowledge of the planet that was used to
yeah,
forge this by like some forge master, and then that was used to maybe help seal away Genova or defeat her when they first did when she went to sleep. Like, you could talk about that, and then
yeah,
maybe that guy in Wutai, our Hector that we keep envisioning, this man or woman, has the Masamune, and maybe they like
yeah,
found it or something, and then Sephiroth fights them and say, because again, like the Masamune, it's become more so what I speculated it was going to be. Like, you see him coat it with whispers in Rebirth
mhm,
before he fights and stuff. I was like, what? Like, kind of suck in whispers and stuff. He cuts open like a new world essentially in many
yeah,
cases when he throws Zack into it and he says, no, not you, I don't want to fight you. Just throws him in. He cuts it open. He does the end of Remake. He cuts it open on the highway. Like, is that, I've said it since then, is it just Sephiroth's power? Like, or is it the Masamune that's doing this? So obviously Aerith does it
yeah,
when she pushes Cloud away, just with the kind of this pure energy that she has because she is an ancient. But I like to think that Sephiroth has hijacked these powers. It's an unnatural, wrong version of that power. So it's kind of a cool idea that he's
yeah,
using this like really powerful blade to just like overpower it. But yeah, I think you could do
yeah,
all of the above. Really,
yeah. I guess sort of what the I kind of like that idea. It almost there are two things that it makes me think of. The first thing is Zantetsuken
Yeah,
in Final Fantasy 16. The way that Odin can just slice through
the
virtually
ocean.
anything.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's sort of Moses.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
the alternatively, are you familiar with Philip Pullman and his Dark Materials trilogy?
I haven't read it, but yeah, I know of this. I know of the
Okay,
title. Yeah.
so basically the title of the second book is called The Subtle Knife, and the idea is that there are overlapping worlds.
Yeah, this is Golden Compass, right? The
Exactly,
first
yeah.
one.
So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the Golden Compass, the actual book that the Golden Compass is based on was originally called The Northern Lights, but yeah, it's exactly that. So the sequel to the Golden Compass is called The Subtle Knife, and it's based on this knife that has the ability to cut a hole between worlds so that people
Mm,
can move between the worlds. So
cool.
it's basically just overlapping, in the same space, but overlapping realities, I guess.
I love it. Yeah.
The characters can move between the realities using this knife. So that's exactly what I was reminded of with Sephiroth using Mazamune
Yeah.
to cut
Well, and
across.
also too, I just thought, man, that actually would work really well if it was like a weapon that was the ancients that ended up in somebody else's hands and Sephiroth took it from them. Because it's just perfectly in line with the idea that he's stolen the knowledge of the ancients. He's stolen their powers, and now he's using it against them. It's such a cool idea. And think about it: if he killed Aerith with that weapon, ooh, powerful stuff, right?
But
Yeah,
and alternatively, one of the things that I'm actually really quite hoping for in part three would I incorporate a lot of specifically Japanese, but maybe other Far Eastern myths, China, Korea, etc. To maybe that will or these myths will then explain where the Masamune came from, and
yeah,
I'm not massively familiar with those types of myths, but I would actually be all for that.
yeah,
If we go in a different direction, that if we do actually use the idea of it's tied with Wutai, that they go with a Japanese myth to explain it. But I mean it could literally be anything. But I
yeah.
do trust that because they are specifically writing the story that it's going to be something good.
Oh yeah, totally. And I got so excited when I heard that last announcement because I was kind of scared. I mean, happy but scared when we saw the last Sephiroth clip in Ever Crisis because you see him kind of like become a hero for the first time, truly. And I was
Yeah.
like, that's awesome, but like, man, so again, no rival, no, he just kind of like fights a couple behemoths, and they're like, oh, he's a hero. I was like, come on, give him warlords to fight, give him people to,
Yeah.
give him cities to conquer and everything like that. That would be the real sort of way for him to be known. Like I said in my first theory talk that I did, how does one become the most powerful warrior? They have to defeat the most powerful warrior, right? How do
Yeah.
you become known as that, like indefinitely? So I think that'd be really cool, and also just like a benchmark. How they're always like, "Oh yeah, Genesis and Angio, they can't beat Sephiroth." It's like, why? How do we know that? Like, yeah, they train,
Yeah.
but like, could it have been that Genesis and Sephiroth got defeated by somebody on the battlefield, and then Sephiroth came in and just defeated them? So it's interesting food for thought, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Just one final thing, just to sort of end that on.
Oh please, yeah,
Based, obviously, we've had this conversation about the parallels between Sephiroth and Achilles, and Ajax, Angel, Odysseus, Genesis.
mm-hmm.
I don't think it's a coincidence that the sort of crux of how Crisis Core begins. Okay,
Perfect.
right. So that's recording at my end now.
All right, thank you. Yeah, just in case, like I said. But yeah, I'm loving the conversation. Is there anything you want to touch on before we move on? Because there's some great stuff.
Uh, no, well, the only thing that I had when obviously we started talking about the symbolism of rebirth, um, at the very beginning, there are one of the things that sort of jumped out at me when you and Aaliyah were talking,
Hmm.
was you mentioned the scene at the end of Rebirth when Aerith enters sort of the edge of creation space or Cloud's mind or
Yeah, yeah.
whatever we want to call it, and cleanses it with the water.
Mm-hmm.
So what water is obviously universally a universal symbol of purification of cleansing,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also symbolic of rebirth as well.
Yeah.
A few examples would be like baptism in Christianity.
Yeah.
So baptism represents sort of a child or an individual being reborn as a child of God, reborn into the church.
Mm-hmm.
In Egyptian mythology, the cycle of life and death was tied to Osiris, which in particular was the waters of the River Nile each year. When the floodplains would become full, it would sort of fertilize the land. So water itself was, heavily associated with this cycle of death and rebirth. one that I do, if we've got time later on, that I do want to get into is, and that kind of ties in with more towards, or what we think is going to happen towards the end of the saga. And there is so much symbolism and references within Rebirth to the Ragnarok tale of Norse mythology, which is the Norse apocalypse. But the Ragnarok tale is not, it's not an end. It is actually a rebirth. So the idea is that the armies of chaos come and they fight the gods, and they basically burn the universe in its entirety, and the worlds sink beneath the sea and then re-emerge as fertile land, which gods and humans can repopulate. So the actual myth cycle within Norse mythology is a cycle. It's a birth, life, death, rebirth story, which is also the kind of idea of, again, going back to this idea of Aerith using the water to purify, but also, it's a rebirth kind of idea with the Christian symbolism, with the Egyptian, with the Norse side of things. So I don't think that's a coincidence at all. But the Ragnarok side of things, that gets really wild. And the tree imagery all throughout the game and stuff. It's pretty good.
No, I mean that's a great idea. And again, this is more your expertise than mine. I'm more familiar with Greek, but yeah, the idea of obviously like whatever Sephiroth's planning with the reunion, right? It could very well tie in with Ragnarok and kind of this like absolution, this eternity. As we talked about, this kind of like sick version, this twisted version of saving everyone, of being a hero, which is super interesting, and also a really cool idea because pretty much not all, but most of the Greek heroes end their life as like a terrible person, like evil people, just terrible deeds are done, and just kind of like like you really don't like them anymore, and then they die in like horrible ways and everything. It's a super interesting, consistent part of Greek mythology, and this goes for Heracles. This goes for kind of Achilles. Yeah, look what he does to Hector. He, mutilates his body and like burns innocent people, as we said, just hostages and everything. Absolutely insane. It's a consistent thing, so it's super cool that they're just kind of keeping with that idea with Sephiroth. This still kind of thinks he's good, even though he's really not anymore. It's super fascinating. And the symbolism. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of one of the things that was special about Greek mythology. Is it's one of the first times in recorded history where gods were presented in the image of man rather than just these sort of abstract deities or based on creatures or things like that. And part of that is the actual tales themselves. Like the gods are fallible. They're not perfect beings, and that's especially the case with the heroes. It's very deliberate that the Greeks understood that mankind is flawed and therefore its creators are flawed.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. I mean, yeah, look at Zeus and kind of all the mischief he's got up to in a lot of the stories and stuff, and his problems with his wife and everything. It's just super interesting to that's one of the reasons I've always loved Greek mythology is starting from like a little bit more of the grounded stories, being the Homer stuff, and then going deeper into it. It's like, wow, yeah, the gods are characters in their own right, which is always so fun. But I love what they're doing. I mean, just what you said at the beginning of the stream, the Aerith, the moment she meets Cloud, there's this symbolism of reunion, like the flower which represents reunion to close ones, and then the fact that he falls onto the bed of flowers when they first meet, well, sort of, and then she pushes him back into the bed of flowers at the end of Rebirth. It's just, so beautiful, and that stuff that is invisible unless, like I said, it asks a lot of the audience. If you are to invest that sort of attention to it, you'll be rewarded with some really meaningful stuff that they didn't have to put in there. Like, I think that's the most important thing to note, is they just took the time to make this so meaningful. So
I think most of us, certainly in the sort of content creator community, have had that feeling more than once at at some point in Rebirth where, oh my god, this game has been made for me personally. But how could we all feel that? How could I feel that about Mythology? How could you feel that about the visuals? How could Blitz feel that about the gameplay, the battle mechanic? But it's there we are. It feels as if they've catered to every single one of us just by having every aspect of the game such high quality and dealt with such care. So yeah, it's incredible.
Absolutely. And first of all, thanks for the sub, Gunblade. And then Chom Dog asks MJ, Phil, what are you guys' thoughts on Poseidon?
In the context, do you mean in the context of Rebirth or in Seven or just in general?
I think he's half kidding, but also what are he's an old friend. But yeah, I think in the context of Rebirth, we talked about water a lot, right? I can think of it in the context of Odysseus. His arrogance, brings about the wrath of Poseidon. His attack of his son Polyphemus. He attacks and yells out to Poseidon, "Yeah, you can't stop me," and everything. Very, very arrogant guy. And you can think, with Sephiroth, man, he's constantly extremely arrogant. After he kind of separates himself from humanity and kind of assumes his new identity. He's incredibly arrogant and separate from everything. And then he is in some way punished by the gods, if you will, punished by the planet. So I think it's pretty cool. And, the planet being Earth, Poseidon actually is like a sort of chthonic god. He represents, it's called the Earth Shake. It's called the Earth Shaker. He causes earthquakes and everything. So it's pretty cool if you think about what some of the things that happened in the FF7 story too, with the planet, the Earth, kind of fighting back, like as a live thing, fighting back and pushing back against Sephiroth because he's, causing it harm. Is such a cool concept. So definitely parallels there.
I didn't see a huge amount to do with Poseidon. I'm still convinced that when you go into the underwater area at the Forgotten Capital where Aerith is at the altar, but there's like a save point just before. There's a male and a female Cetra on the walls. My headcanon is that that's Poseidon. And the reason that my headcanon is that that's Poseidon is that obviously you don't see the Forgotten Capital too much in Rebirth, but in the original game it is just chock-a-block with water imagery and like the coral reef and basically it's a fallen civilization type idea, which takes us, if you were going to think of what, from not necessarily from Greek mythology but from classical studies, shall we say, what would you think of this fallen civilization? And the immediate answer for most people would be Atlantis.
Yeah, totally.
So Atlantis isn't a myth, it's actually an allegory that was sort of maybe not necessarily invented by Plato, but certainly jotted down by Plato. But he talks about, the civilization sort of, its hubris grew to the extent where, the island was sunk into the ocean. But its king was King Atlas, who was a son of Poseidon. So Poseidon, of course, is god of the seas. So already we've got this connection between the Forgotten Capital paralleling Atlantis and Poseidon, which therefore connects Poseidon to the ancients. And if you then go back to the Temple of the Ancients in the original game, the first weapon or the first chest that you come to within the temple is contains a weapon which is the trident.
The trident, for Sid.
Which of course is the actual symbol of Poseidon. And further in the temple you get the nail bat for Cloud. So there's actually a chapter in my Greek myths book about how the temple parallels the story of the labyrinth at times. Theseus is obviously the hero that entered the labyrinth, whose weapon was a bronze club.
Right.
So the nail bat within the Temple of the Ancients might be a joke reference to that, particularly because Theseus is another son of Poseidon.
Yeah. I
And
really like these.
the
Yeah. He's a great hero.
the weapon, yeah, he's pretty good. He's another one whose story ends
Yeah.
with him being a naughty boy.
Yeah,
But
he's a naughty boy too.
um,
Yeah, yeah. And
um,
yeah, he's fighting. He's going
so
to face.
he fights Asterion in the labyrinth, but in the Temple of the Ancients, the weapon for Kate Sith is also the trumpet shell, and the trumpet shell was the symbol of the god Triton, who was the underwater messenger of the gods and another son of Poseidon. But one of my favourite random connections, which I like to think is deliberate, is it's unlikely to be deliberate, but I love it anyway. So I'm going to throw it in here. Is that one of the one of the random sort of things that Poseidon is closely associated with, exactly as you said, like earthquakes. He's called the Earthshaker, but another thing is horses. So Poseidon is said to have been the one that invented horses. So when you are playing the original Final Fantasy VII, what is your mode of transport on the water?
Of
The
course,
tiny Bronco.
a horse.
What is Bronco? What is it? It's a tiny horse.
Yeah, 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 totally. That's fun. Yeah, I like that. That's great. No, I think Poseidon actually assumes the form of a horse a couple times too, right? When he wants to
Yeah.
get
So
intimate time with some mortals and stuff, right?
yes, it's Demeter. I think is the first one
Yep.
he runs after, and then it's the hippocampi. It's the water horses that pulls giant and stuff. So yeah, Greek mythology as a whole,
Yeah, totally.
mad stuff.
Madness. Yeah. But no, that's great.
So there you go. That's my Poseidon.
That's the
Uh,
Poseidon talk. Love it. Love it, man. But yeah, listen, if there's any other topics that come to mind, go for it. I'm going to look at our list of stuff that we wrote down too. If you want to continue down the list, let me know how you're feeling.
sure. Yeah. Just I'm happy to crack on. Yeah.
Awesome. So we already talked about Sephiroth and Achilles, I think, at length. So we'll move on from that. Homeric echoes in Final Fantasy VII, which I think we came up with some really cool stuff. So that was very fun. Sephiroth's reunion and the ending of the saga, we touched on a tiny bit. Final Fantasy means to us, favorite mythological elements using mythology. Well, yeah, why don't we talk about maybe some of the later stuff, unless you have some other ideas you want to touch on, MJ?
No, I'm happy to follow your lead on whatever direction you want to go in.
Awesome. Yeah, we talked about a lot. My personal thought has been that I would really like to see, like, I played it with Aaliyah recently for her first time, the ending of Final Fantasy VII, when we have Genova complete. I
Yeah.
really want, it made me think of like Genova complete. So if this was, voice acted, modern, not just kind of like random bosses thrown at you as happens in the original a lot, it's like, wait a second, how would this play out? Genova complete, does she have all her cells back, which would mean she can get up and talk and walk around? Hold on now. As we talked about, sort of Sephiroth's Achilles heel, it's been his extreme loneliness, this idea that he's seeking love from his mother. And it's like, wait a second now. We have, in the Nibelheim incident, one of my favorite scenes ever in Rebirth that they brought to life, where he, finally gets to look upon his mother, and it is absolutely terrifying. The way they did it,
Yeah.
the way Tyler acted it, it is disturbing in so many different ways. So many different ways. Now we'll be together forever. And it's just like so unnerving and creepy. I want more of that, man. Like, what would happen if she was to, be complete and wake up and talk to him? And then we talked about a couple of theories. I think it was both with Aaliyah and Sleep Easy. What would that lead to, right? Would, since Genova is kind of this, like, world devourer, like calamity from the skies, what would she do? Would she actually just be like, oh, you're just another parasite that happened to be infected by my cells? Or would she embrace him? Or would she kind of try to deceive him in some sick way and say, yes, it's okay, we're together now? Really interesting food for thought. So I'm
Yeah.
curious about your thoughts on that, MJ. What do you think?
Um, I like the idea. One of the things that I really liked was your idea of there being a duet between Sephiroth and Genova,
Yes, totally. A villain song.
singing to one another.
Yeah, like Be Prepared in The Lion
Yeah,
King. Yeah,
I laughed out loud in the middle of the street at that.
yeah. Great. Yeah.
Um,
Well,
um,
yeah. If you guys missed my stream, we were talking about what's gonna be the third Nobuo song, and because we have Promises to Keep, we have Hollow. What's gonna be the third one? And I was like, I would like to see a Tifa one. I think that'd be appropriate. It could also be like somebody else. It could be like All the Party. It could be the Planet. What if we had a Sephiroth song, a villain song, and it's like the Lion King? He's up in the Northern Crater singing "Be Prepared" or
but
something.
only if he's moving around like Dio, just sort of strutting
Yeah, flexing and stuff. Yeah.
yeah,
That'd be great.
in front of a mirror. Yeah, just the sort of a crystal life or
Yeah,
materia mirror. Yeah.
totally.
So what? I'm of the opinion, in general, that Genova is close to a parasitic
Yeah.
entity. So
You think no
not have
characterization,
that.
less characterization, more just like parasite? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the way that she's obviously far more clever than a generic parasite because the
Yeah.
entire thing about overcoming the Cetra and using illusions to sort of show them
Yeah. Taking the
dead relatives and
faces of
things.
our brothers and sisters of the dead. Yeah, that's scary stuff.
So
Yeah.
there's obviously there's a degree of certainly, autonomy, agenda, things like that. So it's not base level parasite, but I one of the things that I was is kind of played in my mind would be whether or not the thing that we mentioned earlier about Achilles' mother Thetis. The reason that she dips him in the sticks is because she can't handle this idea of that she is immortal and her son is not, so she wants to make her son immortal as well. So that's a kind of mother's love kind of type idea coming out. Whereas I think the better story would be after all this time that Genova is reformed and effectively just dismisses Sephiroth because he is that's his one weakness. He is so desperate because of his upbringing. In sort of Shinra laboratories, he is so desperate for that motherly love, for that motherly embrace, that when he's finally presented with the reunified Genova, that she just tosses him away because she's an immortal. This potentially mortal son of his means nothing. It's just a sort of drop in the ocean type idea where, and that would just break Sephiroth and it would be tragic. And I in no way, shape, or form want a redemption arc for Sephiroth, but I think that would, you know, it would be heartbreaking. You would
Oh
feel
yeah,
sorry
yeah.
for
Totally. And I
Sephiroth in
think
that situation.
I agree, and I think what we need, what I think would be great for Sephiroth's character is that we're getting the Ever Crisis sort of like young life, which is amazing. Like I said, getting the Masamune, the Hector Days Achilles, all that stuff. But in my mind, I really like he's a very lofty figure in Remake and Rebirth and his kind of like current self. He's kind of like solidified, in his characterization. He's not having a lot of change in character. I really think he should have like still some sort of arc, in his current stage. And I think
Yeah,
something like you just said, and we talked about in our other stream too, would be really, really powerful to have him completely just alone and also nothing to lose is a very scary idea.
yeah,
And I think it would also be like towards the latter end of the story, like it's just a solid way to both give him a final character push to kind of then have to discard that too. Like this, his only identity that he had, his only thing to cling to. Like I said, we keep taking away these parts of his humanity, like Genesis, Angeal, and everything, and then to have that be the final straw, and then he would literally only have Cloud as like the thing that he
yeah.
could grasp onto, which I think is even more in line with what they're going with. So I think that'd be very cool.
What might actually I've been stewing for so long on the idea of I spoke to Baby Seal about this. I
Mm.
think Aaliyah had a similar idea of, in order for Genova, or in order for Final Fantasy VII to end, you have to eradicate Genova.
Yeah, totally.
Not
Totally.
in order for Genova to be eradicated, she has to be reunited. And if you have or if the story has introduced multiple worlds, and Zack is full of
Yeah.
Genova cells existing in more than one world, so in order for Genova to be reunited, you have to have all cells in one world,
Yes, and there's
which
a big hint because Sephiroth says, I think it's actually in the Temple of Ancients. He says like, for my there's a word he uses like my kind of separated mother to be complete
yeah,
the reunion, and it's like, ooh,
yeah,
okay,
I think it does talk about. You're right that there is one line that explicitly talks about Genova and the reunification or convergence of world. I think he says at exactly the same time, and it's just before the Demon's Gate battle. So at least in Sephiroth's mind, those two are connected. But if it's going to be the situation that he's working towards bringing Genova back together and then she dismisses him, it could very well be the case that Sephiroth is the one to eradicate Genova.
I would love it. And again, it would the sort of vibes of that scene in Nibelheim. Again, it's very small compared to
Yeah,
the whole saga, but that sort of weird relationship and the imagery of very violently kind of ripping off the mechanical
yeah.
Genova and throwing her in this crazed look. Oh yeah, I would love to see him eradicate her, and then what? Then he's just completely
So
alone.
well, yeah. So and by eradicating her, I don't mean that he's seen the light. He feels redeemed.
No,
He
yeah,
wants to
definitely
be
not.
the hero. I mean,
Yeah.
he's just gone full blown banana biscuits. He's gone
Yes,
sort of thing. He's
that would
so
be
angry
awesome.
that he chooses violence
I would
effectively.
love it.
But I think in doing so, by eradicating Genova, he seals his own coffin, kind of thing, or
Hmm.
puts
Hmm.
the nail in his own coffin. The same way, again, looking at, Achilles in his final days, Aristea, that's
Mm.
his undoing is his rage.
Yeah.
Um, so it could also come down to that after he's destroyed Genova, that he turns his rage on the party, but by being in that rage, he leaves himself vulnerable because he's no longer in composed, controlled mode.
Yeah,
Uh,
it would also play
so
in to our talk about Greek heroes and the parallels of a lot of them turning bad. Some of them,
mhm,
and this is the case with just the Greek idea in general, is this idea of kleos, aphthiton, which means eternal glory.
yeah,
And it's
absolutely, yeah,
in a lot of cases, a lot of the heroes have their most glorious moment right before they die.
yeah,
It's obviously the case with Achilles. It's the case with Sarpedon. It's the case with Patroclus. It's a
yeah.
very common idea. So I think it'd be really cool if Sephiroth was to have his Kleos and maybe destroy Genova and then eventually come to his end at our hands. I think it'd be really powerful, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Which actually it brings me one of the things that you and I don't agree on is that I I don't think that the end of part three will play into Advent Children. I think it will be established that Advent Children was a different branch. Yeah, kind of. And the reason for that is that obviously Advent Children has Sephiroth and it has, Kadaj running around looking for Genova cells,
Totally.
which
There's
means
there's
then
a problem because even post Dirge of Cerberus, theoretically, Genova's still around. So it's like, what's
exactly.
happening? Yeah, yeah.
So if you eradicate or in order for the Seven Saga, then you have to eradicate Genova, which means that Advent Children cannot happen.
Yes. Did you hear? I had
So
this one. Well, finish your thought, and then I had this one idea how that could happen. Like we both get what we want, kind of.
okay, well, no, I haven't heard that part yet. So you reiterate that.
Okay, I'll tell you, and then I want to hear all your thoughts. So I thought
Okay.
of this one idea because I had to talk with Sleep Easy, and he's very much in your camp. He's like, no, 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 no. this has to end. This has to be like the final thing. Which I agree. I also want it to be like the finality to the story. I don't want there to be like, anyway, stay tuned for in the next 10 years there'll be like a post Sturgis Cerberus
Part
trilogy or something. Yeah, exactly. So my idea was like, what if there's a moment in Rebirth, or sorry, excuse me, in whatever, like, Return, Remember, whatever it's going to be called, the final part, where just like we talked about this visual language, it's like some of it's subtle, some of it's more on the nose, but it's there. They've taught it to us. What if there's a moment where it's clearly like Sephiroth is wrapped in a wing, and then he opens up and he says, whatever, and it's like, that's it. He just came back from Advent Children. That's the moment. Oh my God, this is now post Advent Children. I will never be a memory. And then we fight him, and there's some finality and there's some ending to everything. And then it's like, oh my God, yeah, it wasn't like a sequel. It wasn't anything. It's just a moment where he's able to exist in these different, quote, dream worlds all at the same time. He's fighting Zack in the church at the end. He's fighting the party at the Forgotten Capital. He's fighting Cloud in the Edge of Creation. He's doing all this at the same time. Theoretically, for what you just said, Advent Children's the bad ending. It's another dream world. So what if that's him coming back, and then it's like, oh my God, it's not a sequel. It's just like in the timeline of events that's happening, he's able to exist, and then we fight him afterward, and then it's technically post Advent Children. We get our ending. Advent Children still happened, quote unquote, and then we're here. Or would you rather it's just a totally like Advent Children doesn't exist? There's no reference to his line there.
Well, I certainly wouldn't say that I would prefer that Advent Children doesn't exist. I actually prefer I like that actually makes sense, that and everyone wins if you do that. Even go down the idea that, I suppose how would it even work that you get to play that sequence?
That would be cool, right?
As the game switches and you are controlling Cloud during the fight sequence at the end. But kind of to actually go back to the point is, I've had it in my head, and I do actually still believe, because of the Black Wing imagery, that the Sephiroth that is encountered in the Singularity at the end of Remake is post Advent Children Sephiroth.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's already happened in your mind, yeah.
So exactly, yeah. So, and because throughout Remake and again throughout Rebirth, there are multiple Sephiroths that are presented, and the one that is I think the ones that are appearing to the party are all the same conscious Sephiroth, but the only physical one that's actually manifesting is the one with the wing, and he's specifically the post Advent Children Sephiroth. And it's Remake did this, in a way that it was really quite clear for the most part which Sephiroth we were dealing with.
Yeah, there's clearly like Sephiroth, who is a robed figure.
Yeah, exactly. So, like in any given scene, you can actually tell which one it is, and then I think the first Ultimania verifies it all anyway. But the Rebirth is different, and like one example would be at the end of chapter 13, where Sephiroth appears after the temple has disappeared, and you've got the sort of black vines all over the place, and the party look at, like, Cloud can see Sephiroth appear and say, here's the black materia, I can now use this to unlock, or this is the key to where the actual black materia is, and he starts kind of creating this storm of whispers and opening a portal or whatever it is he's actually doing in that moment. So the party are all looking up, and it seems as if they're looking at Sephiroth, and it seems as if even before that Aerith shouts something like, "What are you doing?" But it's done in such a way that she could actually be talking to Cloud, because with the exception of the very, very last part before Sephiroth with the wing sort of slices the vine and Cloud and Aerith fall, all the other parts of that he doesn't have the wing, and if you look closely, none of the party are actually interacting with Sephiroth. It just seems to be that way because of the way that it's sort of been visually represented. So I particularly, or I think that they've been so much more subtle with it in Rebirth to the point where it's pretty confusing. But the way that you can actually tell the difference when you kind of break it all down is that, you know, the one with the wing is the one they can see, or you know, basically the post Advent Children one who's talking about things, who's, you know, every time he raises his hand up, you know, to do the sort of the visuals of you know, the darkening sky and all that, he does have the black wings, so it actually ties in with Advent Children really quite nicely. So I'd like to think that that's what the situation is. I am in the camp that for the most part this is both a remake and a sequel kind of thing, and the reason is that the Singularity introduced the idea of that, you know, there are, from here you have access to all time and space. So even though Advent Children chronologically is in the future, the Singularity takes away the linear aspect of that, so that, you know, post Advent Children Sephiroth can be in the Singularity interacting with the rest of the team because time is no longer linear type stuff. So that's where I'm standing on this one. But I'm also conscious of the fact that I may be blinded by that to understanding how they could end the story of part 3 that would lead into Advent Children, because I can't see how they would do it.
Well, they'd have to make the ending
an eradication of Genova thing.
Yeah, they'd have to make the ending very similar to the original, like pretty much exactly the same, and then it ends like that, which would be cool. But I'm with you there. I think I'm just not. Yeah, it's just pretty much a terminology difference. Like, I would love for it to be final, and I've said this on numerous streams recently. Like, I would love for it to be the end of the saga. I would love for it to be the end of Sephiroth. Like, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would also like it that you could like watch all this stuff and it's one coherent story. But I'm definitely not like, you know, needing Advent Children to perfectly tie in, because, you know, I would much rather they end the whole thing cleanly. I guess for the main reason that I don't personally think it's a, well, I'll put it to you like this. The word sequel is not how I would view it per se. I view it as more of a revision, as in we're taking everything and we're doing it right this time. The only reason I shy away from the word sequel is because I think a lot of people literally think that the original is like, you know, I guess what I mean, a lot of people kind of use that word as the naysayers to be like, oh, this means nothing. The whole remake trilogy is just like nonsense. It's just garbage that comes after. It's just them trying to like retcon and everything, which I think it's definitely more of like a revision where we're taking everything from the compilation, you know, hence like having Deep Ground in it earlier and all this cool stuff, like to kind of tell it coherently and then end it. And I think there will be I think the best way to do it is do the same thing with Advent Children, like take ideas from it and just put that into the end of part 3, and let's just have a full coherent thing. I don't think we need to take all of Dirge of Cerberus as well, but yeah, sure, like I said before, let's have Deep Ground fight in the final battle, since they're already in it, at least Vice and Nero fight Yuffie. Like, we gotta have Yuffie fight Nero now, right? We gotta do that, so let's have that in like the war when we're gonna have, you know, Diamond Weapon coming out of the water like Godzilla. You're gonna have, you know, the Wutai army storming the beaches. Let's have just an all-out war. That's cool stuff. I'd love to see that. So similarly,
absolutely.
Yeah, I would love to see it. Just kind of let's tie in ideas from Advent Children, maybe in the final battle of Sephiroth, and then let's definitely end it. So yeah, I'm in there in that camp with you, especially if it can be done cleanly. I'm more of my question too with the kind of sequel stuff is, and let me ask you this. How do they do it? I think they'd have to keep it subtle and just kind of hint it at that it is, you know, post-Advent Children and stuff, because otherwise they'd have to be like, and that's why I thought of the imagery of the wing. there's nothing said. There's nothing like, I just came back from fighting you on top of that building, you know, in Advent Children. It's just like you see him come out of it like, wait a second, that's what he did in Advent Children, you know? Because otherwise, how do you have to have a scene where he's like, anyways, I just came back from everything and now I started the remake trilogy. Like, how do you explain that cleanly? I think if they do it, they should make it just kind of like a couple of very cool, like we're talking about, like the symbolism and stuff. That's like, ooh, wait a second, that's it. That was the hint. That was our green light. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I actually think I think it's totally fair, and I don't. It's certainly not something that I want to get into a conversation with someone and tell them that they are wrong or that their opinion is I don't think that's the correct way to do it. I think the word revision is an even better way to describe it. But the reason that I call it a sequel, when I talk about it, is because I actually think that allows the way that they've told the story is they've kind of introduced time shenanigans, which of course Najima is known for in Final Fantasy VIII. He's certainly not new to time shenanigans. But the idea is that with the remake, you can, at least in my opinion, the reason they've done it the way that they have is that if you do not like the remake, you can still have the original game be the be all and end all. You don't need to go beyond that. But if you do like the remake, then you can have the chronology of remake into Advent Children, but the singularity aspect takes away linear time, which means that you're bringing post-Advent Children Sephiroth back, so that the story that you are retelling or revising through the remake trilogy is both one continuation or totally different, depending on what you wish to interpret it as. I actually think it's genius storytelling because it allows people to see it the way that they want to see it. It also introduces this idea where, exactly as you said, with just going back to the one scene just before you fight Sephiroth in Singularity, where he absorbs the meteor and then he starts throwing bits of the Shinra building at Cloud, which is exactly what he does in Advent Children. But you could then say, well, okay, so I'm looking at this and I'm saying, right, time shenanigans are taking place where Advent Children has happened first, and then he is copying what he did in Advent Children in the Singularity. But equally, you could say, well, if Advent Children chronology comes last, then perhaps what he's doing in Advent Children is copying what he did in the Singularity.
Yeah, totally. So, and then the third camp is that it's just a revision and they're using the cool visual stuff that he does. So yeah, anything's possible. Anything's possible. Yeah.
Anything's possible, and right now we don't have all the pieces of the jigsaw. So whatever your interpretation is, could be right.
Is right, yeah. Well, I'll tell you, there's one thing I really like about the idea that the sequel idea that it is Sephiroth who's now come, like you said, back to before remake. So like it's already happened, the wing thing. Something I really like about that mindset is that a lot of people would say, "Oh my God, what's happened to my Final Fantasy?" And those people would be completely delirious and have not played Final Fantasy if they say that, because what does the first villain in Final Fantasy history do? In Final Fantasy 1, Garland. I said this I was a lot more, what's the word I should use? Abrasive or like chaotic in those days when I was streaming a few years ago. I was like shouting, "Oh, you people think you're Final Fantasy fans." Garland, FF1. If it is a sequel, it's even more Final Fantasy than FF7. That's what he does. He's in a time loop and he keeps repeating the battle and going back in time. You have to finally like sever that time loop at the end. That's why it's called Final Fantasy. It's the final time he comes back and you stop him, and then and it goes on. So I was like, that would actually be really cool. So I'm definitely not opposed to it, especially if it's told really good how it has been, and it's not just kind of this like, I don't know what the word is, like over-explained thing. I do like the idea. So, and I like the idea enough of them like cutting it off and ending the saga forever, at least like the Sephiroth Genova saga, that I would love if they do it. Whether that means it's a sequel and this is like kind of the pinpoint where that ending happens, or if it's just like it's a revision and this is the new ending now, the end. You know, I'm totally game for either, and I hope either way, it's subtly told where we'll be able to pick that out. But they might also do it so we can still have this conversation and debate which is the truth after the third one, which I'm not opposed to. Again, if it's well done, if it's well told, and the character is there, the characterization, the story, the drama, like I'm sold. You know.
I absolutely, totally agree. I actually think the most, the best thing they can do to pay homage to the original game is to actually have an open end. So that, you know, I think Sephiroth should be, you know, the end of Part 3 should be the end of Sephiroth. The end of Part 3 should be the end of Genova. But there is enough ambiguity there that will allow us to, you know, come up with our own interpretation of, well, what actually happens to the party. You know, the same way that the original game did. The only confirmation we had was that Red 13 survived.
Yeah, it's important to note before Advent Children, like a lot of us thought the party died, just straight up, like they got nuked by meteor and that's it. Yeah.
So like, I think the best thing that they could do is actually have that. I don't need a definitive answer to how the story ends. I would like to see the party succeed against Sephiroth, to know that part of the story ends.
Yes.
Because, you know, and to go back to your Garland point, the original Final Fantasy, the whole point of it was that the heroes defeat Garland, knowing fine well that they will never be known.
Yeah, they will be heroes. Forgotten. Yeah, totally. It's a cool idea.
You know, and this, you know, when you and Aaliyah were talking about, you know, the Red 13's line about, you know, we're forgetting the whispers, we're forgetting about the future. So already we're starting to see parallels with that concept as well. So
love it. Yeah, I love that idea that they said that too, because again, that's what my first reaction was like, oh my goodness, are they trying to just make it tie into Advent Children? So then in Advent, they're not like, remember those whisper guys? They don't say that in Advent Children, right? So it's like, wait a second, is that what they're doing? Or better yet, are they saying we're all going to be forgotten, like you speak of? So it's a fascinating line of thought, and they're just setting up some. I'm actually like, the third game has to be gargantuan. It has to be monumental, epic. Essentially, like I've been saying it. Everybody's like, oh, they can't top Rebirth. Oh, I think they're going to top it. I think it's going to be so much bigger, so much crazier. That goes for gameplay, and because like when you talk about weapons, when you talk about airships, it's going to be ridiculous. Yeah, it's going to be ridiculous.
I've you know, been pretty open about this since Rebirth came out, that I had very high expectations for Rebirth, even though I tried to temper those. I had very, very high expectations, and every single one of my expectations were either blown out the water, or they went so far above.
Oh yeah.
That I hadn't even imagined that this was possible.
It's like incomprehensible. Yeah, I mean, just even look at chapter. What was it chapter 9 in Rebirth, where you have the whole like Tifa goes into the live stream stuff.
Yeah,
absolutely, like out of left field. You never would have even expected that whole sequence to take place. It's just so incredibly well done. And then I mean, and I was shocked. This is why I was so happy, because I was actually in Japan with Aaliyah. MJ, I don't know if you knew this, but I was like kind of late on my Rebirth stuff because we were in Japan for a month. We came back and we had to go to some conventions and stuff for work. So I was playing it very late. So I was effectively off the internet for quite some time. Yeah. And I was so happy. This is why I've come up with a lot of these theories where a lot of people are like, wow, I've not heard anyone talk about this. I was in my own like zone, man. I had no outside interference. I beat it. Me and Aaliyah had our conversations because we had a lot of private talks about it. It was so much fun. Yeah. We did our theory talk, and only then did I start to like, okay, let me watch this podcast the boys did with Max Dude. Let me see what MJ thinks. Let me see what other people think. And now I can come to the conversation. But I mean, I was just like, the stuff at the Temple of the Ancients. Oh my god, I think it's the best dungeon. I think it's the best. It's next to like Ultimicia's Castle for me. It's just like an epic kind of little bit of everything dungeon. But there's like a couple movies worth of cinematics that happen just from like the Temple of Ancients to the end. It's like a many hour thing that takes place. The trials with the characters, right? The trial,
Oh
like
man, yeah.
so much content, and it's just like again not something I expected. Oh, how are they going to adapt this dungeon? Which again, I was playing it in tandem, which I think is another reason I was able to like pick out things and kind of compare it so perfectly. I was playing with Aaliyah, so we're like, okay, play Temple of Ancients in the OG, play the Aerith scene. Now let's play Rebirth, and I never would have expected like, oh, this is what they'll do with this dungeon. It's like you play it on in the modern day, and you have like the PS5 version that has no encounters if you want. It's got you can do ×3 speed. It's like a 15-minute experience. You run through the dungeon and you're done. Maybe less if you really know what you're doing, and that's it. And it turned into this Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade, like amazing thing. And it just Turks get characterization, and this happens and that happens, like unbelievable. So I mean, I agree completely, MJ. It blew everything I had out of the water. And I've been saying it since Remake. I'm like, you guys aren't thinking big enough. The next one's going to be crazy. And wow, I was more right than I thought I was going to be.
So that when I cannot conceive how they could possibly make it better, how they could make Part 3 better.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I said the same thing about moving into Rebirth. They surpassed everything. So yeah, I mean, I have faith that they'll prove me wrong. And I mean, I will quite openly admit that Final Fantasy VII, the original game, had the biggest impact of any form of media on my life. Rebirth is probably the best experience I've ever had in any form of media.
I love
it. It's I can't conceive how they will do it better, but I have every faith that they absolutely can. So
yeah, well, the only evidence for me is how good it was. It's the same artists, it's the same thing, and they're they're in the midst of that story that they're telling. So I think it's at least it's possible that it will be far exceed. So I need to take a 1 minute break. MJ, feel free to take a break too if you want. No, also, if you don't want to take a break, feel free to. This is a perfect time to tell everybody about your books. So if you want to just please plug away, go crazy. I mean, they're fantastic books. So I encourage you to really tell chat about them. And remember, this will be on YouTube too. So please go for it. I'll be back in like a minute.
Sure, no problem. Well, yeah, everyone, thank you. If you've tuned in and you haven't, or you didn't see the start of the video, I have over the last couple of years been working on a number of books, specifically to do with mythology and how that is implemented into the Final Fantasy series. So the first book that I released was Norse myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII, which looks at things such as why is Midgar based on the sort of the middle world, the realm of men, Midgard, Norse mythology, the same way that Nibelheim is derived from Niflheim, which is also where the underworld in Norse mythology is located, which is why Nibelheim in Final Fantasy VII is so closely associated with death. I look at Odin and how he's connected with Nibelheim. I look at what is now, or should be common knowledge now because of Rebirth, but when I released the book a few years ago, I explained why Midgard's Golem was actually Midgard's Sorner, the World Serpent. And it goes into more nuanced things, such as what the wolf, the Fenrir, represents for Cloud and Advent Children, the comparisons between Genova and Hel, the goddess of the underworld, or things like the little kind of tidbits of information. For example, in at the end of the original Final Fantasy VII, when you fight the Proud Claude, the Proud Claude drops the Ragnarok sword, whereas in Remake, if you fight the Pride and Joy prototype, which is it's basically just the prototype for the Proud Claude, defeating that will get you the Gotto Dameron accessory. For anyone who knows their 19th century opera, Richard Wagner had a series of operas known as Der Ring des Nibelungen, where he effectively retells this, or the last part of it is the retelling of the Ragnarok myth, but it's called Gotterdammerung. So basically, the remake of Ragnarok is Gotterdammerung, which is a really kind of cool nod. It just sort of showed that the developers knew what they were doing in terms of the mythology. After this, I moved on to Greek myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII. Again, I've got a copy of this here for anyone who's interested. So that looks at the classical mythology side of things, and it there's far more in Final Fantasy VII than meets the eye. You know, where the book, for example, opens up with the story of, or the creation myth, you know, and the connections between Gaia's cliff and the meteorite that struck the planet carrying Genova, and how that parallels Mother Earth, Gaia, and Father Sky, Uranus, in Greek mythology. And it goes, the book itself then goes into look at comparisons between, you know, Aerith and Persephone. It looks at comparisons between Genesis and Dionysus, which is unbelievable. This is not something I expected to have to research, but it was so eye-opening. It talks about the heroes Theseus, and the labyrinth, Perseus, and how that connects to the sort of Junon scenario with weapon attacking. Looks at Heracles and the labours of Heracles and how those are reflected within Dirge of Cerberus. And loads of other stuff as well. So if you do get the opportunity, please do consider checking it out. And again, if you keep a close eye on my social media, I'm currently working on a mythology book for Final Fantasy 16 as well. So busy.
Can't wait.
Thank you very much.
Aaliyah has linked mjgallagherbooks.com in the chat, guys. Feel free to check it out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, not a problem.
The books themselves are for anyone who's kind of finds it easier just to sort of click that button and have it shipped off to you. But yeah, any support is hugely appreciated.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the
Yeah,
sub.
thank you, Aaliyah, for that.
No, we love your books, man. They're fantastic. I recommend them to everybody. Like I said, even just Final Fantasy fans, that's the most, the thing that I haven't heard people talk about as much with your books is that they're just amazing, like, recaps of all the Final Fantasy VII universe. You're going to get a lot of, like, tangential picking up of mythology just by reading this, but he reminds you of the whole saga in the Norse one, especially in the beginning. It's fantastically done, so I highly recommend them. But yes, and of course, we love to support our fellow Final Fantasy creators. But yes, I've been loving the talk. How are you doing, MJ, on time? Are you okay to go a little bit longer?
I can go a little bit longer, yeah. So it's just shy of 1 a.m. here, but
Okay.
so far I'm doing pretty good. So I've got a little bit more in the tank.
You got a little more than that? Okay, we'll do a little bit more, and then I actually want to open it up to questions. And I'll ask, as you said, I'll shout them out to you when we do that. But is there anything else you want to talk about with me before we move on to the questions?
The only thing that I wanted to sort of run by you and get your thoughts on, I don't know if you had a chance to kind of catch my chat with Baby Seal, and in my chat with Baby Seal, I sort of spoke about something that stood out to me in Rebirth in particular was the trees symbolism, and particularly to do with the kind of world tree type idea. So in or throughout Rebirth, you know, it kind of starts a little bit subtly that the crafting materials that you get, you know, you've got a couple of metals, you've got like the gemstones, but a large part of the crafting materials that you get are wood or bark from trees. We then sort of get into the situation where, you know, it's always kind of been the case that the gold saucer is, you know, it's a giant tree. You know, that's been the case since the original. Specifically, the gold saucer, it kind of is a little bit different in Rebirth, but in the original game there were eight levels to it. So you had the 7 different squares plus the station, and then at the bottom of the tree was Krell Prison. So counting those together, you've actually got 9 parts of the tree, which is kind of aligns very well with Yggdrasil, which is the world tree in Norse mythology, and the 9 worlds there. Obviously we have Midgar, as I was kind of speaking about while you're away. Midgar is based on Midgard in Norse mythology, which is the realm of men, or the central world, which is also, you know, just going off at a tangent, is what Tolkien based Middle Earth on, which is why you've got references to like the Mithril Mine. You've got references to Thorin in the grasslands as well. Thorin is almost certainly named after Thorin Oakenshield, because right outside his hut is a bunch of orcs as well. And Thorin, in kind of later editions of The Hobbit, is the one who gives Bilbo the mithril shirt. So anyway, I'm digressing.
I love it. I love Tolkien just as much. So,
and you get to Nibelheim. Nibelheim is based on Nibelheim again, as I mentioned earlier. And Nibelheim is the world in which this realm of the actual underworld is based in Norse mythology. But when you get there, you get access to ingredients to make the Yggdrasil armlet. Now, Yggdrasil is again the world tree.
right.
So it establishes, you know, connections throughout, or Rebirth establishes connections throughout to trees, and specifically to the Norse world tree. And then we get to the Temple of the Ancients, right? The Temple of the Ancients has a shit ton of tree imagery.
It does. You're right. Yeah, I mean, you walk in the door and there's this big tree.
Exactly. So, but it's kind of designed in a way that, you know, like the canopies underneath and the roots are at the top, which is a kind of just a little bit of foreshadowing of the mechanics of, you know, the dungeon of the Temple of the Ancients and stuff like that, right? So my idea here was that when Sephiroth is talking about the different worlds, and he's talking about how you know, when barriers of fate are breached, you know, new worlds are born, and some are, you know, some endure and some are cut short, and so on and so forth. So the way that I visualized that was that if you have, you know, the main, let's say the planet's desired fate, so that would be your trunk, and each time a barrier of fate is breached, you would get, you know, a kind of main branch coming off, and then within that branch, you know, if something else happens that takes you in multiple directions, then you get, you know, smaller branches coming off, the way that you would in, say, an ash tree, you know. And a good example of that I kind of gave on the stream with Baby Seal would be in the Terrier timeline, when Zack is on the motorbike in the railway tunnel, and you get to see what happens if he stays in the Terrier timeline and goes to the Shinra building, or what happens if he goes to save Biggs in the Pug timeline, or what happens if he does neither and stays at the church, and then you see the Corgi timeline. So these are offshoots of, you know, the main trunk. So that's just one example of a branch leading to smaller branches. So if you apply the same principle to a number of barriers of fate being breached, the image that would be built from that would resemble a tree. So that was kind of how I was looking at that, and how I was comparing the imagery and the specific look at the trees from Norse mythology, and how this compares to the world. And of course, trimming the branches would effectively be the world's ending, and coming back and converging into the trunk again. So the in Norse mythology, at the end of the myth cycle, Ragnarok, the world tree Yggdrasil and the worlds are all burned, and the sort of, the way it's described is that the worlds themselves sink into the sea, and are then they re-emerge as sort of fertile lands where life can begin anew, and that then begins the cycle again, right? But if we are looking at this idea of the branches being clipped to kind of come back into the center trunk, and look at the Norse story specifically, in order for the rebirth to happen, in order for you to get the good ending, as it were, there has to be an apocalyptic event. And one of the reasons that I think we are looking specifically at the Ragnarok myth is that obviously we get Midgardsormr at the start of the game. Midgardsormr is the world serpent, and one of the signs that Ragnarok is beginning is that Midgardsormr will emerge from the sea, the same way that the Zolom or Midgardsormr emerges from the swamp. When you get to Nibelheim, one of the other heralds of Ragnarok is that the armies of the underworld will kind of come forth. So of course at the end of the game you get to see all the black robes, as an army marching off. But even more specifically, the hellhound of the underworld breaks from his chains and runs off. And the hellhound is called Garm. Okay, and Garm is situated outside a cave called Nibelheim, which is why in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, the cave that you access on the way up to the Mount Nibel reactor is called the Nibelheim Ravine, which is accessed by the Garm Bridge, or the Garm Passage, or something like that. Okay, it's also, you get the Garm things. The Garm Bracelet is the kind of the last or the most powerful sort of armour that can be worn. In the Loveless play, Red 13 plays the Hellhound Garm, so we get all of that going on. Okay, so the ultimate weapons for the characters as well. Tifa gets Yarngripper, and Yarngripper are the iron gloves of Thor, who kills and is killed by Midgardsormr at Ragnarok. For Kate Sith, you get Gjallarhorn, which is also a move that's used by Odin, but Gjallarhorn is the horn that is blown by Heimdall to let the gods know that Ragnarok has started. And the Aerith's final one is Gambantine, which is not specifically from the Ragnarok myth, but is from Norse mythology. And in a roundabout way, it's actually to do with the ferryman idea. So it might kind of tie into like the River Styx and Charon type idea. And Red 13's final collar is called Brisingamen, which is actually the necklace that is famous for the goddess Freya, who is similar to Odin. She's actually the goddess of death, or death in the battlefield. So all of this, all of these Norse connections are pointing towards Ragnarok in particular. Um, yeah. So yeah, and the meteor in particular, like the fire giants are the ones who instigate Ragnarok, and they're the ones that the king of the fire giants, Surtur, is he's basically he's the representation of molten lava. How the Vikings, or how the Icelandic Vikings in particular, they interpreted the most destructive force in the world as volcanic eruptions. There was nothing stronger in the world to them, which is why the fire giants exist in Norse mythology. So of course, meteor is it's the fire giant. It's this huge big molten rock. So that's basically, I think there is so much imagery in there and so many direct references to Ragnarok that you can't really get away from the fact that we seem to be headed in that direction.
Yeah, it's a foreboding. Yeah, it's foreboding direction. But no, man, that's incredible catches. I love it. I was thinking so much as I was playing all of the numerous Norse words, many of which I couldn't recall, I couldn't remember, and I'm like, can't wait to talk to MJ. He's gonna know what every single thing means, and here you go.
Yeah. So it's unbelievable. Yeah. So going back to part 3, I also can't conceive that they will have as much mythological references in that game, but I really hope they do.
What's left? Yeah. No, I think they can, but it's gonna be a tall order.
So yeah, that's that. I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that. And
oh, dude, that's fantastic, man. The idea of the world tree, the branching paths of the different worlds, different dreams is so cool. I really, really like that. It's fantastic. It also reminds me of Berserk. I don't know if anyone's caught up on Berserk, the manga. I don't know if you're familiar at all, MJ, but it's
not with that. No.
There is a world tree in Berserk, which is really cool. It's kind of like birthed from like a would-be god or a fallen god, and it becomes this like twin world tree. It's crazy stuff. But there's actually characters or a character who uses the world tree to like travel the branches. Like they can travel across the world and kind of like appear at different places and everything. And it's reminding me of like how Sephiroth is kind of able to just pass through different worlds and everything, again with your idea of it being the world tree. And I'm not sure if that at all ties to the myth, but just a thought I had from thinking about Berserk and their interpretation of it.
Well, I think you're onto something there, because Sephiroth is named after the Sephirotic world tree of the Kabbalah.
Yeah.
Jewish mysticism. So, baby seals your man for that one. But
yeah. I talked to my friend Spencer.
There are more than one world tree referenced in Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect then. No, I'm really excited to see what they do, and just this idea of it's so cool to me that we have the reunion, meteor. We have these like in retrospect kind of basic ideas from the original game, like compared to this, right? Where they're able to kind of tell the same story while giving it so much more meaning. And I think that's what I'm most excited for, is like, when we talk about the idea of the reunion has already been so expanded to mean many different things now. And it's going to be so cool to see. Again, I'm hoping in the same vein as Rebirth that, we'll be able to circle back afterwards and be like, okay, the reunion happened. What was the imagery there? How deep are they going to go into the sort of world tree revelations, or will it be just kind of like symbolic and, we'll get a couple grins out of it and nods. But it's just so cool to see. Again, now we have many layers of them using Final Fantasy VII, which is like pretty much their own mythology now. But they're using Greek mythology, which built that, and then they're coming back to the Greek, back to the Norse, and being like, okay, Nojima, Sakaguchi, Nomura used this to create a story back in the day, but now we're going to go back and kind of revisit it, add more expand certain things, and it's just like it's insane. That's why I keep saying it. You were talking about earlier the world tree symbolism. The first thing that came to mind again is like I don't know that I've ever seen a piece of media just so stacked with references and information and meaning. Again, not just like, oh, this would look cool, put that in there. It's like, no. Why should we put it there? What does this mean? And it's like you said, was this game made for me? You were probably playing the Nibelheim section. Like, did they put this in here for me to put these pieces together? Right? It's so and I thought the same thing when I was playing the Nibelheim section and there's all these Norse references. I'm like, oh, here we go. The Nidhogg Inn and everything. Like, oh,
yeah, exactly.
MJ's gonna have a field day with this. Yeah.
That blew my mind. That one as well.
Yeah.
So I love it, and I would actually be surprised if they take the mythology and are apply it in such a way that it is so on the nose, that they are if they actually follow like the Ragnarok myth beat for beat, I'd be extremely surprised for that. I think they'll kind of keep it. Obviously discussions such as this one, this is a fantastic way for them to promote the game, a fantastic way for them to market this by putting something in the game that we will then talk about and others will learn about and go on and play the game and talk about it and share further ideas and so on. So I think kind of having it bubbling just below the surface actually serves them really well. But you get things like the Phoenix is another one, right? Where in the original Final Fantasy VII, or the Phoenix myth, as we kind of spoke about earlier, is about the as we know it, it is about the bird that comes to the end of its life and then bursts into flames, and from the ashes rises the same bird reborn. But that's actually a much later version of the myth. It comes from like a 4th century poem. It's not actually the original story. The original story was that the phoenix would lay an egg and then it would die. It would kind of build a nest for itself, and the egg would hatch, and the new bird would carry the corpse of the old one and sort of lay it to rest in the temple of Heliopolis, which is the fire element, because Helios is the sun. So the kind of the ring of fire, the halo type idea that you see in the Phoenix in Final Fantasy VII. That's the connection there. It's actually to do with the sun, because it's the sun that causes it to combust in the first place.
I love it. Let me pause you for 1 second.
Sure,
got a big raid from Jahara Jade. Shout out to Jahara. Welcome, Jaharmi. Yes, and let me give you see, as I did on the earlier stream, State of Slay. I'll give you my best Clive. Welcome, Jaharmi, to the stream. I'm chatting with MJ Gallagher, the absolute legend, teaching us about mythology, the power of symbolism in Final Fantasy VII. So thank you, Jahara.
Amazing.
Thank you, everybody, for coming over, and everybody check out Jahara if you haven't. I'm joined with the author MJ Gallagher, who's wrote many books on mythology and Final Fantasy, and we're just dissecting and enjoying the rich story of the game. So thank you so much, Jahara, for the raid. Welcome, everybody, and please continue. Please continue.
Thank you for coming. So yeah, where I was going with that is that our understanding of the Phoenix, like I said, comes from the 4th century poem, whereas the original myth is closer to the adult bird dies, and the younger bird carries the corpse of the older bird. But it kind of happens simultaneously. So, death into new life was the idea rather than rebirth. Which we actually see at Fort Condor in the original game. Like, the death of the adult condor is simultaneous to the new bird hatching. And the new bird hatching is where you get the Phoenix materia. So, it kind of ties in directly there. Crisis Core kind of takes it in a different direction, where the Phoenix materia is obtained at Nibelheim, But Nibelheim itself is the idea of rising from the ashes. It's a town that's burned down and is then rebuilt in exactly the same way. So it kind of brings that element into play. Rebirth takes it in a it's a bit more subtle in what they're talking about here, because obviously you don't get to visit Fort Condor. So Phoenix is the materia associated with the Junon region. So you get to see Fort Condor in the distance, and obviously if you play certain side quests, you get to encounter the Condor as well. But what's important here is that the SRC, or the kind of the remnants of the Republic, over the course of the story start to rise again. With everything that's going on with Glenn, and sort of building this, or bringing together these different SRC cells that will then go to war with Shinra. There are, if you kind of listen to some of the like NPC conversations, they do actually use phrases like rise from the ashes, or like rebirth, or kind of the movement is reborn and things like that. So what the Phoenix symbolizes in Rebirth is the rising from the ashes of the Republic, and that's what's going to take us into part 3. So how they have applied the Phoenix over those 3 different games is different, but all relates to the same Phoenix myth, or similar Phoenix myths.
Yeah, very, very informative. As always, you're catching some amazing references and beyond. I'm gonna tell chat now to start preparing your questions. So we may speak for a second more, but let's get the questions in the chat so we can select our favorite ones and ask. If you want to ask anything about mythology, if you want to ask anything about Final Fantasy, put forth a theory, go for it. Thanks for the follows, guys, and we'll get to it. So yeah, we'd love to hear them, guys, if you've been waiting and holding off the whole time. But yeah, MJ, again, is there anything else you want to talk about? This has been so fantastic, so informative. I've loved everything we've touched on today. It's been fantastic.
Off the top of my head, no, I can't think of anything specific that we haven't covered. There are so many things that, listening to your conversation with Aaliyah and listening to your conversation with Babycell, and that at the time sort of prompted ideas that I wanted to speak to you about. But I think we've covered most of them. So
it seems like you sort of agree with my idea. Well, not agree with, but you caught my idea that the Final Fantasy X parallel, right? Like of the dream, the dream that goes away and then eventually kind of emerges or goes away, and Titus obviously existed. It wasn't like a nonsense thing. So I think it's really cool that they are doing something. So again, it's not exactly the same, but it's the same writer. So you can see him playing with some similar ideas. Yeah.
So my take on this, when I actually first finished Rebirth, I was really against the idea of the other worlds were existing within the live stream, and I was against it for 2 reasons. The first one is that the live stream seems to have dried up in those other worlds, suggesting that it's not in the live stream. And the second reason is that I just don't like it. So I'm not suggesting that it's actually wrong. It's not for me. Which then kind of put me in the position where in my opinion, the Zack that is shown at the end of the game, but is sitting in the church, is an actual physical corporeal Zack.
Like he's in the character's world.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, he's got to be. He's got to be, right?
It has to be, because otherwise, his use in the story seems redundant.
Mm-hmm.
But then, if you kind of reverse engineer that, in order for Zack to be alive in this world, he also has to have continued to exist in a live state at some point. It doesn't necessarily have to be in all the different worlds that he's shown, or the different Zacks that we see. Some of them may have ceased to exist, some of them may have been killed.
Yeah.
So, but at least one of them has been alive, and I think it's actually the main one, the one that's in the Terrier timeline. because he's the one that talks about, he's been whisked away by or
Yep.
the wind and that sort of idea. Um, so my take on that was that, okay, well, if he is alive, and not just an element of consciousness somewhere, then it must mean that the worlds are also they also physically exist.
Yes.
I've kind of I've backed off a little bit on that, and I think a kind of happy middle ground is the dream idea.
Yeah.
Um, I don't disagree with you on that. I'm not I'm not uh, as kind of adverse to it as I was with the live stream idea. I don't I don't like it as much, but also there is so much evidence to support it that I
Yeah.
definitely can't dispute it. Um, but one of the things that was really interesting was when Najima was tweeting about Yogacara and Jungian, the collective unconscious. Now I don't know much about Yogacara at all. I discussed it very briefly with Baby Seal when I spoke with him, but my understanding is that one of the principles of Yogacara is that you create your own reality,
Right.
which plays right into this sort of dream world type idea.
Yeah. Well, I asked. So
Um,
my friend Spencer he teaches Eastern thought, and he's
okay,
completely versed in Buddhism and everything. So
okay,
I mentioned that to him, and I was immediately like, oh, okay, that means pretty much nothing, because his response was, he's like, oh, Yogacara is just like an entire branch of Buddhism. So there's no like, oh, like that's the first idea that comes to mind. He's like, yeah, I mean, maybe if I watched the ending of the game, I could be like, oh,
yeah,
that's what they're going for. But yeah, there's no just like, oh, that's what Najima means. So it's pretty much just Buddhism, is what he said. So I'm like, okay, I would
yeah.
have to
That
show him the ending, which I think would be a really cool stream. I should do that sometime and get his thoughts on it. But yeah, so I'm not
well,
sure.
yeah. So I totally agree that just to say, if you look at Yogacara, that's it. Totally agree with you. The other thing though is talking about Jungian or collective unconscious at the same time
Yeah,
actually narrows it a little bit
true. Good
because
point. Yeah.
um, one of the things that Carl Jung proposed, he did a number of experiments over his lifetime, and I'm a little bit more familiar with Jung.
Okay.
But one of the things that he spoke about was that, or he proposed this idea that our existence is we're in a perpetual state of dreaming. So when you're asleep, you're dreaming, but when you're conscious, you're in a lesser state of dreaming, but you're still like effectively how you perceive the world
Right.
is still almost a dreamlike state, which is kind of why, like, that way when you're like walking down the street and you become distracted by a thought, and then the next thing you know, you're 50 meters.
Yeah, you just like appear somewhere. Like, how did I get here? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, how
Totally.
did I get here? Right. So
Yeah.
it's that idea of like your imagination, your thought process. You're in a constant state of dreaming. It's just sometimes the lines between consciousness are a little bit blurred, which, like I said, it narrows down the possibilities a little bit. So if you take that concept and then apply it to the Yogacara principle of creating your own reality, and then we use the terminology that appears in Rebirth of Aerith saying, "You are in my dream," sort of thing. It
Right.
it,
Yep.
it starts to lend to this idea of the stamps themselves represent the dreams of particular individuals. But one of the things that I found, like, it's an idea that I'm sort of messing around with, and I'm a little bit conflicted by it because when you're in Aerith stream at the end, and like we spoke about earlier, and you go to the different vendors in Sector 5, and both vendors say something along the lines of, you only get one.
Yeah.
That's those lines to me seem like they're carrying quite a lot of weight. You know, are we talking about you only get one life, or do you only get one fate? Do you only get one dream world? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, true, true. I love that.
Um, but obviously, you know, separate to that, we get to see Zach making the choice of he's going to continue along the Terrier timeline, but there are other potentials. You know, there's the Puggle timeline, there's the Corgi timeline, etc. So there are too many questions. There are too many parts of the jigsaw that are missing to actually pinpoint exactly what it is. But um, because I went down that particular rabbit hole of thinking as time goes on and becoming more and more aligned with your idea of it's the Final Fantasy X
Yeah.
idea of um, the, they are existing within dreams or particular individuals' dreams. So it doesn't necessarily the other worlds don't necessarily have to be just one person's dream. You know, it could be
Yeah.
various bits and pieces. But that's kind of what triggered my thought process when you were talking about the Final Fantasy X stuff. So
I love it.
um,
Yeah, I'm super into the idea just because for me, like a lot of people seem to just kind of like write it off almost as like, oh, it's just a multiverse, it's just timeline, whatever. Like, which was super disappointing to me. So I was very happy to be like, oh, I mean, this isn't. I mean, it's a new thing. Like, yeah, it may have kind of like parallels to like pieces of cool ideas like that, but I mean, it's an original idea, and you know, this writer has come up with some like incredible ideas that have like, I mean, look at the sort of like imitators of Final Fantasy X after that game came, how many like JRPGs like and then some are just like, oh, it's FF10 with like a slightly different ending and everything, and it's just it's such a strong story. So
yeah,
I say why not like let him play with the things he created better than other people, and also it also made more sense to me when going back to the end of remake, I was like, oh, the edge of creation. Like there's that golden light, this big sort of like nebula. This is the reunion. This is the converging of all the dreams. Finally, all the worlds that are going to call them into one kind of like absolution that he can rule over. He said everything will cease to exist. All these dreams are slowly dying. They will all die eventually, he said. But it's a homecoming. You know, they're all coming home. So it's like, it's tying in really strong. And again, like, I don't think they'll ever sit us down. I mean, that's the closest thing we'll probably ever have is that speech that Sephiroth gives in Rebirth. This is the nature of reality. Like he literally gave a tutorial on what's going on. I doubt we'll get something any more like concrete than you know visual language and imagery hinting. But I think they told us probably as much as they will as far as like the mechanics of it. And I don't know if I'd want to. It's like we said earlier. I don't know if I'd want them to be like you know have a diagram and explain everything that's happening because then number one it's just kind of like the extreme exposition is like all right this is too on the nose like who would explain it like that, but also it takes a little bit of the magic out of it. I'd much rather it makes sense completely but there's open to interpretation, kind of like the end of Final Fantasy 16,
yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
open to interpretation but you know what happened like
Yeah, I would agree with you on that one. That
yeah
we don't need step by step exactly what the mechanics are, but enough information to work out what we think is going on,
yeah
rather
exactly
than because right now there are so many possibilities
yes
that you know some of which are more legitimate than others. But um, I really I don't think we're in a position just now where anyone could possibly have the answer because there are
no
too many
oh
you know, pieces
listen
of critical information missing.
after Rebirth, I was like, oh yeah, no, they're on a different level, man. They are so expanding everything and so deeply considering everything. Like, yeah, it's just not simple enough for us to be like, oh yeah, it's just this is that, this is that. And again, that's why like to the word of the sequel and its use is more what bothered me than the word of the sequel. Like people just be like, ah, it's just a stupid sequel. Like it's just this cheap kind of like thing, and I'm like, it is anything but simple. It is like it is such a deeply considered and like such a like they put such love and care into this thing that it's just such a like disservice to say oh it's just whatever. So I think that's more the people that I disagree with the people who are just like writing it off. It's just Marvel, multiverse type stuff, and I'm like, I'm not getting that at all. Like,
Yeah,
and that's why I was so happy to turn off, all of the outside sort of influence when I first experienced it, and I think everybody should when they play these games specifically because they're so rich. Is like really let it sit with you and really ask yourself what it made you feel, and that's why I think it was so cool that I was like they actually made Cloud us.
yeah,
Like what happened when, like I said, when the Aerith scene happened in the original, we're like, no, it can't be true. No, no,
yeah,
no, it's not true. There's no way that can't happen, and that's what's happening with Cloud. Right? It's so smart, and that's why, yeah, really, really ask yourself what it makes you feel. Look at the scenes as scenes instead of just like this kind of only additive thing that like only exists to like be a little tiny bookend on FF7. Like it is a
yeah,
deeply meaningful project in its own right. Um,
yeah. I totally agree. And do you know what? I've kind of mentioned this a couple of times previously as well, but the the depiction of Cloud's reaction after what happens to Aerith, where it's as the player you're left in a state of confusion. You are in denial to an extent, but also, exactly as you said, you're kind of in Cloud's shoes where you kind of you don't know how to react to the point where you don't react.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and I actually lost my grandmother last almost exactly a year ago, and that's the first real time in my life, certainly as an adult, where I've had to deal with grief in that way.
mm,
And I've never encountered a more perfect depiction of what grief is actually like in
yeah,
the sort of minutes and hours and days afterwards of just you can't process it. You don't, your brain just won't accept what's
yeah,
happened. And
absolutely, man.
it's they've perfectly captured that, which
Yes,
and I understand why, for people who thought it was going to be definitive that Aerith died, it was going to be definitive that Aerith lived, or who wanted to see the burial scene, for example,
yeah,
totally understand why they were upset, or they felt as if they didn't get what they wanted. But I'm in the same boat as you, that what they have done is they have perfectly recaptured the emotion that we felt the
yeah,
first time round of just, I don't know what to do with this information. I can't,
absolutely,
the most genius thing from that type of storytelling was having Aerith's theme play during the Genova fight in
oh
the first game, of just,
man, yeah,
it's so juxtaposed
mm-hmm,
that it's such a good way of capturing the confusion and the just not knowing what to do, and trying to go on with your life even though your brain is screaming like there's something very wrong here.
absolutely,
It's
yeah.
Yeah,
No, I mean
I loved it.
it's and sorry about your grandmother, by the way.
Thanks.
It's so beautiful what they did, because this is what I always say to people. It's like a lot of people were like, as you said, but I wanted to see the thing. But I wanted to see that thing. I wanted to see the scene. This is why I use the word revision. Is they've taken something, and I'm sure it was a hard decision. And I'm sorry, their gongagas are the size of Midgar to do this decision, because they said we are going to take out essentially the most iconic scene, or it's just kind of like present it in a poignant way, and they ask themselves like, what's more important here, what we want to say, or just fan service? And they decided, again, their going gagas are materialized. They were like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna say what I need to say, to voice this more powerfully than the original, in the long run, in the whole trilogy. And it's gonna
Yeah,
hurt, and it's gonna be rough. And like the more I think about it, it's like, dude, it's a child's reaction to grief. I mean, it's an adult's reaction to grief, right? We all struggle with it. Like, but a child is literally, they say, I don't know if this is true, consistent with humans, that like a child cannot even grasp the idea of death until they're like 9 years old. They can't even like fully understand what it means, even if they're told explicitly. They just can't understand it fully. Um, and it's like, oh yeah, Aerith is right there. She's right here. Yeah, let's go, Aerith. Like it's just this like childish interpretation of what's happening. They need in this desperation, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. And again, I'm sure we'll be seeing the rest of that scene in some
Oh, yeah.
context, in some capacity. Again,
Oh,
the two main options that I've voiced probably both happen, but it's most likely going to be Sephiroth uses it to finish off Cloud. As I said, talk about it, MJ, when they first met. Was Sephiroth says before he meets Aerith, you can't save anyone.
yeah.
Remember that. And then he's going to tell Cloud, I told you couldn't save anyone. Why would you think you saved her? I told you that already. And then show him what happens. And then I think maybe Tifa in the live stream will also be like, it's okay. We need to face this together. It's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt, but this is what happened. You couldn't save her, and it's gonna be awesome. But or some different thing that we haven't thought of, right? But I think it's just like it's gonna hit like a ton of bricks, and we're gonna hear Eric's thing. It's gonna be so brutal, and sort of the genius of him when he puts her on the ground and says, "I got this."
Yeah.
It's the imagery of him lowering in the lake, right? That's what I caught, and all these things when Aerith comes and cleanses the edge of creation, it's on a bed of water. The whole thing becomes water. It's when she's being laid to rest. Like there's just so much in there. So yeah, it's clearly deliberate. It's not just like, oh, let's take it out last minute to save the payoff. It's all deeply considered, and I'm sure they were sweating when they hit that delete button on that scene. Trust me. But yeah, I am so impressed with them as creators to be like, nope, it's more important to say what I need to say. We're gonna catch flack for it. People are gonna be upset, but this will be better. Yeah. But yeah, it's such a great thing. Aaliyah asked in the chat, MJ. She said, "What would you like to see in the next Final Fantasy?" So say 17 or whatever.
17. First of all, hi, Aaliyah. I loved your conversation with Phil on this matter. I've been listening to it for the last couple of days.
Awesome.
So it was absolutely wonderful. I I really enjoyed 16 going back to the medieval, sort of not high fantasy but medieval fantasy.
Yeah, yeah.
I thought that was pretty cool, but because I like Final Fantasy VII was my first, and I loved that, and until 16 came along, 8 was my second favorite. So what my personal interpretation of what Final Fantasy should be is more that, kind of modernized feel. Not quite steampunk or diesel punk or whatever the terminology is for that kind of half dystopian world. I like that scenario. I wouldn't mind seeing something closer to Final Fantasy VIII this time
I would
around,
love
where
that.
it's a bit more grounded in realism, but also, we're dealing with a time travel story. One of the things that I do feel that 16 lacked, and I love 16, but I felt as if they missed the mark a little bit with Jill and Clive's relationship. It wasn't explored enough, and particularly the trauma that Jill had been through, and I felt that a little bit more focus could have been put on that. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that to this day, my favourite love story is Squall and Renoa.
I love it. Yeah, it's a great story.
So
Absolutely.
I would personally like to see something like that, where it's more grounded in realism. A love story, maybe time shenanigans. I would like to see a female lead again. That's I personally
Same, man. Yeah, we need it. We
haven't played
really
through
do.
13 wholly, but I think that we're well past time where a female lead should really be there, and stepping away from, as cool as Lightning was, I don't think she could ever get away from that label of being,
Female Cloud.
female Cloud, which
I knew you were gonna
it's
say.
not
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not wholly true, but you can see where people are coming from.
Yeah, I agree.
I
I
would
see why they
much
say it, but it's not. Yeah.
I would much rather a lead character that was closer to like an Aerith, someone or a Yuna, someone who has, a very difficult
Yeah,
story ahead. So rather than being the main character,
yeah,
looking at them from the outside, you actually get to be that character and see what they're dealing with. I think that would be quite
totally.
cool.
Yeah, yeah. Instead of being the sort of like the secondary lead, where it's like, oh, you're
Mhm.
interpreting their struggle. Listen, you
Yeah.
made me think too, man. I would love to see a character like Tifa, which is honestly in some ways similar to Aerith and Yuna, where it's like a kinder personality. Like
Mhm.
be the lead and struggle with like a lot of Tifa's problems. She's actually too kind, gets her into trouble in
Yeah.
a couple times in the story, and like, and that also like is a monster, can like destroy people, but is very kind of like respectful and everything. I think that'd be
Yeah.
cool to see. Then you could have a secondary character be like the Titus or Squall, who's like really abrasive and like doesn't quite fit with them and everything. It'd be a cool character interaction. So
Absolutely, yeah. And I think 16 proved that a kind character in Clive, someone with
yeah.
a good heart, it works. I think Clive's absolutely amazing
Oh yeah,
because he's a good
great.
a good a good example of overcoming trauma and using it positively.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Clive is probably the best part of 16. Is just Clive's character is so
Mm.
cool, and he like threads, you know, through the entire narrative. And honestly, you're with Clive the entire time. Like that's one of the only things I said about 16. Is like, man, there's a lot of scenes where Clive is like one on one, just because the nature of the story, the gameplay, they needed him to take everybody's power. So it's like there's a lot of scenes where he's
Yeah,
like, okay, I'm fighting her, I'm fighting him. They
yeah,
died. They're dead. They're dead. Next. And it would have been really cool to have all the characters in a room more and just have like, man, the drama of these characters interacting could have been insane. But because of
yeah,
the nature of the gameplay, they kind of had to do it where it's like, anyways, I'll take that power. I'll take that one. I'll take that one. So,
yeah.
but
And
it's still
fair
a
play
great
to
game.
Ben Starr.
Oh,
I can't
he's the man. Yeah,
like
dude.
it's astonishing what Ben accomplished with Clive because of how much
Yes.
presence that there had to be, exactly as you said.
and
So
and and his love for the series too. You could just tell
mm,
it comes through, and like I mean, man, that whole Bahamut episode is it's like a Shakespeare play. It's
yeah,
ridiculous. All the stuff that happens is fantastic.
yeah,
So, but yeah, that's our answer, Aaliyah. I would love to see something like that. Yeah, MJ gave me that idea. Like, let's have a different sort of character. I would love to see another female lead. Um, that's just like very different from anything we've seen, including the male or female characters.
mm.
It'd be really cool. In fact, yeah, I was thinking more on the Terra side of things from FF6. Are you familiar with 6, MJ? Yeah, you are.
I've never personally played it, but
Okay.
I know the story pretty well. Yeah,
Awesome. Yeah, I think that would be cool because again, definitely a more reserved kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of like kind of tiptoeing around who am I. There's a lot of identity stuff.
yeah,
I think that'd be really cool. But it's not kind of like this gusto driven main character who's
mm.
very like puffing the chest out and stuff. I'd love to see something like that, but we'll see. I don't know. And honestly, after Forspoken and the sort of like reception performance that did, I don't know if they would do female, but I really hope it was either already planned or they're going to do it anyway because there's so much opportunity, and I think it would bring in a lot of other players as well if we get another female
Yeah.
lead. I do.
That's kind of the thing about I can't count myself among those that played Forspoken. I played the demo and I didn't enjoy the gameplay, so I
Mm,
didn't actually pick it up. But
yeah.
it looked really cool. But I think it's the society we live in now, where so much discourse took place about the who the lead character was, that it kind of ruined it for people. In fact,
Yeah.
like it's I hate the internet sometimes.
Yeah.
It's
Like I said, my most enjoyable thing, I was like, oh my goodness, I wish I played Remake like this. Just complete, because I had to, because I was so late. I was like, I'm going to get everything spoiled. Nothing. I had no people, negative opinions shouting in my ear and stuff. And I was like, yeah, this is the best game ever. And then I had my first break where I came back onto Twitter and I was like, wow, what are people saying? And like 10 minutes later, I was like, I think I was like, bombarded by insane shipper like like delirium, and I was just like, oh my god, yep, I hate the internet, and it's just like tainted my experience. Even though I looked at it for 10 minutes, stop again. Let's just go
yeah,
back to my own thoughts. Yeah, so no, it's a beautiful thing when you just, and this goes for everything. If you're going to see a film, don't like, unless you're really deciding if you should or not, don't read a bunch of reviews and like, go in with all of these like preconceived notions, unless it's like somebody who you really, really, really trust their opinion and you trust their kind of sense of art or their own work and you really trust their thoughts. Because a lot of people just, their motivations are very questionable and they just want to like, make a thing seem a certain way or, get people upset or farm clicks on the internet. So, completely disingenuous stuff. So be careful.
Do you know, I had a piece of advice given to me years ago that it still sticks with me when I read reviews, is that if you wouldn't ask the person for advice, don't listen to their criticism.
Yes, absolutely. And you should ask very few people advice, like the people who know you, unless it's like, what should I have for lunch? Like very harmless
Yeah.
advice. Like, actual life advice, you should ask only people that know you and you trust immensely. And I think that's another problem with the internet is people are just like valuing everybody's like garbage disposal of random ideas as like, because they're bored and they're not even really thinking about what they're saying, as just like, oh, I saw this, therefore it's truth and everything. So yeah, be careful out there, guys. Protect. I say this all the time, like curate your social media, especially because it's just like the brain feed that we're subjected to these days. But really curate your experience. Like if, especially Instagram and Twitter, the more like visual ones, you're scrolling. Like if anything on that scroll does not add to your joy or happiness or kind of like provide you with value in some way, delete it. Like block, mute, whatever. Like don't be following stuff that makes you feel bad. Oh man, I don't feel good about myself, or oh, I'm comparing myself to the bit. Don't look at it. Like, make your experience good. So, anyways, random.
Yeah.
Don't take my advice though. See, that was a test.
Yes.
That was a test.
Like advice from Phil. That's
Yeah, that was a test.
a
Don't
man
take.
of many talents. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, I have one more question for you, MJ, before we wrap up, and that is, what is your favorite sort of like mythological Final Fantasy tie-in? If you had to pick one from all the games, what's your favorite? And I'll start with mine. I think back to it being a kid, really like some of the summons who then like spurred me on to go read. And like for example, Shiva, Ifrit, all these things, particularly Shiva. I remember being like, "What's that? That's a cool name." And then eventually learning like, "Oh, that's from Hindu." And then eventually my friend that I told you about, who's Eastern thought teacher and just incredible guy, he was like, "Oh, you need to read the Ramayana," which I highly recommend to you, MJ, if you haven't read the Ramayana. And I'm like, "This is Hindu mythology, awesome." Oh,
Wow.
this is Shiva. Oh, this is this is this. This is that. This is Garuda from 16 there it is in the Ramayana, like all these great things. So I think that is why I've always loved Final Fantasy. It's like it's taught me stuff about the mythology. It's educational, even though it's just kind of referential. It'll make you ask, oh, what's this? I want to go learn about that. And it's just, I think that's why MJ clearly enjoys it for similar reasons. But yeah, I'm curious, do you have anything like that for you where it was like your favorite thing that either when you're a kid caused you to go read about, or just even after having researched everything, you're like, I love this?
There's a couple, yeah. I think one of the most important ones for me was actually the Midgar Zolom, because
Yeah.
like already knew that Nibelheim and Midgar were references to Norse mythology, and obviously Odin being present as well,
Yeah.
and the Fenrir bike,
Yeah.
and the Fenrir
Sort of.
sort of symbol for cloud. So I already knew that the names were in there, but the one that really kicked it off for me was when it dawned on me that the Midgard Zolom was actually a mistranslation of Midgard Sorm,
Yeah.
and then sort of looking at, okay, well, it's a giant snake and it's in a large body of water that's in close proximity to Midgar, and started to sort of piece together, well, okay, that's not an accident.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Totally.
that's what initially got me really, effectively that was the catalyst for me writing the Norse myths book. So the Midgardsorm one is probably up there with the most important.
Yeah.
One of the least expected ones is also from Final Fantasy VII. The one I was talking about the comparisons between Genesis and Dionysus of Greek mythology.
I can't wait to hear more
Where
about this. Yeah.
so uh so just to give you a bit of context, Dionysus is was a god who effectively it was god of winemaking is one of his main titles. But it was alcohol in particular, but the dual aspects of alcohol that Dionysus could bring you merriment, but it could also bring like violence
Yeah,
and
frenzy. Like
madness.
what's his
Yeah,
name? The prince who gets torn apart. Is it in
yeah,
Bacchus? Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Horrifying.
um, but what he also represented was that through like I was speaking about Demeter and Persephone earlier on, because he was the god of winemaking and the harvesting of grapes, he also represented the cycle of death and rebirth.
Mm.
The tale that was associated with him wasn't quite Dionysus dying and being reborn as such. It was more about overcoming death.
Mm.
So the original story for Dionysus was that his mother died when he was first born, and that when he became powerful enough as a god, he descended into the underworld and took her soul up to
Mm.
Olympus, so that she could become a goddess rather than having to live in the underworld. So that
Yeah.
was him overcoming death, overcoming Hades,
Mm.
which is the whole idea about the grapes being taken from the vine and then the vine being clipped and then it would grow again the following summer type idea. Um, but he was also closely associated with kind of breaking the shackles of the people who are most oppressed within
Mm.
society. So, like slaves, women, ethnic minorities, things like that, who would then follow him and become part of his retinue everywhere he went. So, when we kind of then apply this to Genesis, um, obviously we've got the dumb apple.
Yeah.
Um, we learn later in Crisis Core that Genesis was the inventor of Benora White apple juice. So
Yeah.
we've got this connection of the winemaking. Genesis, who is repeatedly referred to in terms of resurrection or rebirth.
Yeah.
He specifically his fan groups start an annual resurrection festival for Genesis, if you kind of follow the study groups in Crisis Core. He obviously creates his own army, who
Yeah.
the copies become frenzied,
That's so true. Yeah.
as degradation goes on. So that then connects to this sort of the oppressed individuals following him and becoming frenzied and so on and so forth. So that's just scratching the surface of the connections between Genesis and Dionysus.
Wow. That's incredible. Yeah. Didn't even think of it.
But the Final Fantasy 16 blew my mind in terms of the different things. And because I've got an interest in lots of different types of mythologies,
Mm.
seeing so many of them, there
Yeah.
are so many references to Celtic mythology and the Arthurian legends.
Mm.
Like when we were talking earlier on about the cycle of death and rebirth, and that being a constant theme within Final Fantasy 16. Like the waypoints that are used throughout the game are the obelisks, but the first obelisk that you come across is right next to the Oribel fields,
Yep.
which is where this sort of town of bearers has arisen under like a former fallen airship.
Mm.
In Egyptian history, obelisks were explicitly used as points of worship for the sun god Ra,
Yeah.
right? So Ra was believed to be each day he travelled across the sun in a sunboat, which is where the airship thing comes in. But you then get to like the daily cycle was that the sun would rise, you would get to noon, you would get to sunset, and then nighttime is when the sun boat travelled through the underworld and had to fight its way through the underworld just to rise the next day. So the Egyptians associated birth, life, death, rebirth with the daily cycle of the sun. So using obelisks specifically as the waypoints in Final Fantasy 16 is, and in the context of the Fallen, is a direct reference to Egyptian mythology.
Wow.
But the one that blew my mind the most is the kind of Gnostic takes, or kind of the to do with the Book of Genesis, but specifically Gnosticism. And for anyone who's not familiar with Gnosticism, basically around like the early centuries AD, there was a Christian sect that combined kind of Christian teachings and Judaism, like historic Judaism, with Plato's philosophies, where the idea was the God of the Book of Genesis was not the one true God, but rather a false God, which is why he seems malevolent at times in the Book of Genesis. Particularly, why he casts Adam and Eve out from the Garden of Eden, why he tries to destroy men in the flood myth, why he gets so angry with mankind when they build the tower of the Tower of Babel to try and connect with God. He smites them and destroys the tower. So the idea of this false god is actually reflected really quite spectacularly in Ultima.
Yeah, totally.
But the fall of man, this taking away mankind's knowledge, also reflects the relationship that Ultima has with the fallen, or with the early civilizations. The flood myth actually ties in really nicely with the Akashic and the sort of ether floods.
Yeah.
And the Tower of Babel story is basically about mankind trying to reach the heights of God, which is, if you pay close attention to the tale of the sins of Zemeckis in Final Fantasy 16, basically what happens is that the fallen try to take the power of the Mother Crystal and challenge Ultima, and Ultima basically destroys the civilization, brings the airships down, and scatters the survivors, who then become the different kind of cultures within Valisthea.
That's awesome.
Which is just what the Tower of Babel story is. Basically, God smites the Babylonians, who then scatter, which is an allegory within the Book of Genesis as to why all the different tribes of the Middle East speak different languages. So there are so many parallels, it's unreal.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of things that I'll be talking about in my new Final Fantasy 16 book.
I was just gonna say, guys, yeah, this is very interesting, and what better way to learn more than learn about it in MJ's new book. But man, what a pleasure to have you on.
That was a long answer.
That was a good answer. That was a good answer. But hey, what a pleasure to have you on, MJ. Like I said, finally we got to sit down and chat. It's been absolutely wonderful to have you. And guys, please follow MJ Gallagher on Twitter. Where else? Shout yourself out. Yeah. Where else can they check you out?
Yeah. So Twitter is probably the best way to get a hold of me. I'm at FFVII Novels. Again, if you're interested in the books, Norse myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII, or Greek myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII, those are available on Amazon, or you can check out mjgallagherbooks.com. If you're interested in my sort of back catalogue of stuff, I actually just host that on my Patreon, so a lot of it's just free to access, but that's just patreon.com/MJ Gallagher. And the other thing that I would invite you to check out is that I have a breakdown series of the sort of hidden details within Rebirth. So it looks at sort of lore details, or things that you might not have spotted during your own playthrough, or in some aspects talk about the mythology as well. But that is commissioned by KupoCon. So you'll find that on KupoCon's YouTube channel. So it's just the series itself is just called Rebirth Revealed, which is difficult to say for a Scottish person. Um, I don't know why we named it that, but yeah. So if you're interested in checking out my stuff, basically the first protocol is just to hit me up on Twitter.
Awesome.
Because I'm pretty active on there, and can point you in any direction you might want to go.
Awesome. Yeah, Leah has linked your Twitter in the chat as well for people who want to click on it.
Thank you.
But yeah, we've had so much fun, and yeah, it was great to hear your voice talk about like kind of Tolkien and everything. It really sounded right. And, so much fun, man. But yeah, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, and I've been a huge fan of your work for several years now, and I always kind of tune into your Final Fantasy VII content. And it's just been an absolute pleasure being here. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, let's do it again sometime. I mean, especially after the third game comes out, but maybe before, and hopefully we can meet in person one day.
Definitely.
All right, I'm gonna cut the live stream there. Take care, friends.